Director mocks the intern, but his smile turns to fear when she opens the old bag. In the icy corridor of St. Jude's Medical Center in New Orleans, a 42-year-old woman walked with steady steps while holding a brown paper bag worn by time. The medical director watched her with disdain, preparing his sharp words for yet another session of public humiliation. Dr. Julian Harrison always took pleasure in belittling the humblest employees, especially those who dared to dream too big. When he saw Eleanor Miller applying for the administrative intern position at 42 and wearing simple clothes, he decided she would be his new favorite target. Eleanor Miller. He pronounced her name as if it was something dirty. You really think you have what it takes to work at a prestigious hospital like this one? Eleanor gripped the bag's handle between her fingers, but kept her gaze steady. I have experience in the healthcare field, Doctor. I studied hard to be here. Experience? Dr. Julian laughed loudly, making other employees stop to watch. You live on the outskirts. You must have gone to public school. What kind of experience could someone like you possibly have? Eleanor's eyes gleamed for a second, but she remained silent. She had waited for this moment for years, planning every detail of her return to the place she once called home. Doctor, I just want to work honestly, she replied softly. Work? You shouldn't even be stepping on the same floor as our distinguished patients. Dr. Julian stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. People like you are what's wrong with this country. No class, no education, no future. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, remembering all the early mornings she had spent studying for the civil service exams, all the jobs she had lost when she tried to tell the truth about that place. She had returned, not by chance, but on a mission she had carried for 28 years. Your age is also a problem, Dr. Julian continued. 42 years old to start as an intern, that's pathetic. You should be at home taking care of grandchildren, not trying to compete with young, qualified people. The head nurse, Margaret Sullivan, watched the scene from the reception desk. Something about the new intern's posture intrigued her. There was a dignity there that didn't match the humiliation she was enduring. And that ridiculous bag you carry around everywhere, Dr. Julian pointed at the object Eleanor was holding. Looks like you picked it out of the trash. Is that how you plan to make a good impression? Eleanor looked at the bag that had been her companion for so many years. Inside it were the secrets that could destroy that man's reputation and the entire hospital. Secrets she had kept for nearly 3 decades, waiting for the right moment. Dr. Julian, she said, and for the first time her voice came out stronger. Are you sure you want to know what's in this bag? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and most importantly subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing, Dr. Julian stopped laughing. There was something in her tone that bothered him, a confidence he didn't expect to find in someone he was humiliating. Now you're threatening me, he asked, trying to regain his authority. That's grounds for immediate dismissal. It's not a threat, Doctor, it's just an honest question. Margaret discreetly approached, pretending to organize papers at the nearby counter. Her veteran nurse's intuition told her something important was happening there. Open that bag then, Dr. Julian said loudly so everyone could hear. Let's see what kind of trash someone like you carries around. I bet it's rags or old food. Eleanor looked around, seeing the curious faces of the employees. Some seemed uncomfortable with the situation, while others clearly expected more entertainment at her expense. It was exactly as she had imagined it would be. Are you sure, Doctor? Absolutely. In fact, I'll take the opportunity to do a search. Who knows, maybe you're stealing hospital supplies. The accusation made Eleanor's blood boil, but she took a deep breath. She had dreamed of this moment for years, planned every word, every move. She couldn't let emotion get in the way now. That's fine, she said, slowly unzipping her bag. The first item she pulled out was a yellowed photograph. Dr. Julian leaned in for a closer look, and his face went pale immediately. In the photo, he was 16 years old, standing next to a smiling young nurse in front of the same hospital where they were now. Where did you get this? He whispered. This is me, Doctor. Eleanor Miller, head nurse of this hospital between 1996 and 2000. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret let the papers slip from her hands, finally recognizing the face that had changed over the years, but still held the same determined eyes from decades ago. "Eleanor?" Margaret whispered. "Eleanor Miller? The nurse who disappeared out of nowhere?" Dr. Julian took a few steps back, his arrogance quickly turning into panic. He remembered that woman perfectly. She had been his father's favorite, the former director, until the day everything changed. "Do you remember me, Julian?" Eleanor asked calmly. "Of course you do. I took care of you when your mother came here for her chemotherapy treatments. You were just a scared teenager." I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "Of course you do. Just as you know why I left." Eleanor reached into her bag again, and Dr. Julian instinctively took another step back. The staff moved in closer, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. "Margaret, do you remember what happened to me?" Eleanor turned to the head nurse. Margaret shook her head, confused. "We never knew. One day you were here, the next you had vanished. Dr. Charles said you had resigned to move to another state." Dr. Charles lied. The second thing Eleanor pulled from her bag was a sealed envelope with the hospital's official letterhead. Dr. Julian immediately recognized his father's handwriting. "This is the report your father wrote about my dismissal, Julian. Do you want me to read it out loud?" "Stop it," he said, his voice coming out louder than he intended. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I won't tolerate it." "This isn't a game. It's justice." Eleanor opened the envelope carefully, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. The paper inside was well preserved, protected by years of obsessive care. "Eleanor Miller poses a threat to the hospital's reputation. Her investigations into our medication protocols are damaging relationships with key suppliers. I recommend immediate dismissal before she causes any further damage." The hallway fell completely silent. Margaret covered her mouth with her hands, remembering old rumors she had never fully understood. "You were investigating the hospital?" Margaret asked. "I discovered that we were giving expired medication to public health service patients," Eleanor replied, her voice echoing down the hallway. "While private patients received the best treatment, the poorest ones got medicine that was sometimes months past its expiration date." Dr. Julian tried to interrupt. "These are serious accusations without proof." "Without proof?" Eleanor smiled for the first time. "Julian, do you really think I kept an old bag for 28 years without having proof?" The third item she pulled out was a plastic folder full of documents, medical prescriptions, drug batch reports, internal communications, everything meticulously organized and protected. "Here are the medication requisitions from January 1999. She showed a paper. "And here are the expiration records for the same medications expired since October 1998. Margaret approached and examined the documents. Her decades of experience allowed her to recognize the authenticity of the papers immediately. "My God, Eleanor, this is terrible." "And here," Eleanor continued, pulling out more papers, "are the lists of patients who received these medications. Many of them developed complications that doctors couldn't explain at the time." Dr. Julian was visibly sweating. He vaguely remembered conversations between his father and the administrators about cutting costs and optimizing resources, but he had never paid attention to the details. "My father did what was necessary to keep the hospital running." He tried to defend himself. "Necessary?" Eleanor raised her voice. "Was it necessary to give expired medication to poor children? Was it necessary to falsify quality reports?" A cleaning worker passing by stopped when she heard the conversation. It was Mrs. Rose, who had worked at the hospital for over 40 years. Her eyes widened when she recognized Eleanor. "Little Eleanor?" she exclaimed. "Is it really you?" "Hi, Mrs. Rose." Eleanor smiled, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she seemed to relax a little. "Child, you disappeared out of nowhere. Everyone kept asking where you'd gone. You were the only nurse who treated us with respect." Dr. Julian realized he was losing control of the situation. Other staff members began to gather, and some of the older ones also recognized Eleanor. "Enough of this show," he said loudly. "Security, remove this woman immediately." "Not so fast, Julian," Eleanor said, reaching into her bag once more. "I'm not finished yet." The fourth item she pulled out made Dr. Julian's legs feel weak. It was an old cassette tape with a handwritten label. Meeting 03-15-1999, Doctor. Charles Harrison. Do you remember this date, Julian? She asked. It was 3 days before I was fired. I was just a teenager. I don't know anything about that. But your father knew, and he recorded this meeting where he admitted everything. Eleanor showed the tape for everyone to see. Even after so many years, it had been well preserved. In this recording, your father confesses that he knew about the expired medications. He confesses that he authorized the practice to maintain profit margins, and he confesses that he decided to fire me because I was about to report everything to the medical board. Margaret felt the world spin. She had worked during the 90s and remembered patients with strange reactions that they never managed to properly explain. Eleanor, can you prove this recording is real? Margaret asked. I have more than that, Eleanor replied, pulling out another set of documents. I have the expert reports I commissioned at the time, paid out of my own pocket. I have the chemical analyses of the medications. And I have this. The fifth item was what made Dr. Julian nearly faint. It was a handwritten letter from his father, addressed to Eleanor, dated the day she was fired. Eleanor, you have always been an excellent professional, but you understand that I cannot allow your findings to be disclosed. I hope you accept my proposal of silence in exchange for generous compensation. If you refuse, I will be forced to take measures that will harm your career forever. Eleanor's voice trembled as she read the letter, painful memories resurfacing. I refused the offer, of course. The next day I was fired for inappropriate behavior. Your father spread rumors about me at every hospital in New Orleans. He said I was unstable, that I made up stories, that I couldn't be trusted. Margaret had tears in her eyes. She remembered the rumors, how other hospitals refused to hire Eleanor, how her career had been destroyed overnight. You never managed to work in the field again, Margaret murmured. For 28 years, I cleaned offices, worked in stores, and cleaned houses. But I never stopped gathering evidence. I never stopped looking for the families who were harmed. Dr. Julian tried to respond. Even if that's true, it was almost 30 years ago. It has nothing to do with me. Doesn't it? Eleanor smiled bitterly. Julian, do you remember Mrs. Gladys? The name made Dr. Julian stop breathing for a second. Gladys had been the hospital's favorite cleaning lady in the 90s, a black woman who always treated the Harrison family as if it were her own. She died last year, Eleanor continued, after years of battling complications that started in 1999, when she received expired medication for a simple infection. You can't prove that? I certainly can. I have all of her medical records. I have the reports of the medications she received, and I have this. Eleanor pulled out a sixth item from the bag, a photo of Gladys in a hospital bed, embracing a teenager. The teenager was clearly Dr. Julian. She gave me this photo last year before she passed. She said you were like a son to her, that she had taken care of you when your mother was sick. Gladys never knew that the family she loved was responsible for her suffering. Tears began to stream down Margaret's face. Gladys had been dear to everyone at the hospital, a sweet woman who always had a kind word for every employee. Eleanor, do you have anything else in there? Margaret asked, her voice barely able to come out. I have an entire folder of similar cases. I have names, dates, symptoms, complications. I have 28 years of silent investigation. Dr. Julian was visibly trembling now. Other hospital employees began to gather around the group, drawn by the commotion. The news that the legendary Eleanor Miller had returned was spreading quickly. Dr. Harrison, a firm voice came from behind him. It was Dr. Arthur Sterling, the hospital's most respected cardiologist and a member of the administrative board. Dr. Arthur, I can explain. Julian, what is going on here? Dr. Arthur approached the group, noticing the tension in the air. Eleanor turned to the cardiologist, who recognized her immediately. Eleanor? Eleanor Miller? But how? Hi, Dr. Arthur. It's been a while. Dr. Arthur had been one of the few doctors who had always respected Eleanor's work when she was head nurse. He had never fully understood why she had disappeared so suddenly. Eleanor, we've missed you so much, we never understood why you left like that. I didn't leave, Dr. Arthur. I was driven out. Eleanor opened the bag completely, dumping all of its contents onto a nearby table. Hundreds of documents, photos, reports, letters, and pieces of evidence scattered everywhere. This is the proof that St. Jude's Medical Center, under the direction of Dr. Charles Harrison, systematically provided expired and inadequate medication to public health service patients throughout the entire 1990s. Dr. Arthur examined some of the documents, his expression growing increasingly grave. "Eleanor, this is very serious. Why did you never come to us before?" "I tried. But Dr. Charles had too much power, too many connections. He managed to completely discredit me. Who would believe a nurse over the medical director? So why are you revealing this now?" Eleanor took a deep breath. This was the question she had prepared herself to answer for years. "Because I found out that many of the affected families are still alive, they're still suffering. And because I found out that the practices may have continued." Dr. Julian tried to speak, but Dr. Arthur silenced him with a gesture. "Go on, Eleanor." "For the last 5 years I've worked as a housekeeper in other hospitals in New Orleans. I overheard conversations, saw documents, observed patterns. Julian, here with us, carried on some of his father's practices." "That's a lie," Dr. Julian exploded. "She's making all of this up." "Am I?" Eleanor picked up another document. "This is an internal report from January of this year, signed by you, authorizing the use of equipment with expired maintenance because the cost of upgrades is not justifiable for patients in the social program." Dr. Arthur took the document from Eleanor's hands and examined it carefully. His expression grew darker with each passing moment. "Julian, is this your signature?" It was a temporary situation." "Temporary?" Eleanor pulled out more papers. "Here are similar reports from the last 3 years. Always the same justification, always the same patients being harmed." The crowd of staff members was growing. Nursing technicians, receptionists, housekeeping staff, all drawing closer to hear better. Many recognized Eleanor and whispered among themselves, trying to understand what was happening. "You know what hurts me the most, Julian," Eleanor continued, "is that you knew your father. You saw how cruel he could be when it came to humble people. I thought you would be different." "My father built this hospital," Julian shouted. "He saved thousands of lives. He saved some and harmed many others. And you're doing the same thing." Dr. Arthur was flipping through the documents quickly, his face growing paler and paler. "Eleanor, these reports, if they're true—" "They are true, Dr. Arthur. Every single paper in this bag was verified 3 times. Every date was checked, every name was confirmed." "How did you manage to get all these internal documents?" Dr. Julian asked, desperate. "Over the years, I cultivated friendships with staff members at various hospitals. Humble people you barely notice exist. Housekeeping staff, night security guards, technicians. They see everything, Julian. And when they trust you, they talk." Margaret was examining one of the lists of affected patients. "Eleanor, some of these names, I remember them. Patients who had inexplicable complications." "Exactly. And many of them are still alive, still dealing with health problems that started here." "What do you want from us?" Dr. Julian asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I want you to do the right thing." Eleanor pulled out the last item from the bag, a thick folder labeled "Affected Families, Current Status." "Over the last 10 years, I located 127 families who were harmed by this hospital's practices. I visited every single one of them. I documented their stories, and I helped however I could." "Helped how?" Dr. Arthur asked. "I paid for medical appointments out of my own pocket. I bought medication for those who couldn't afford it. I accompanied them to exams. I did what this hospital should have done decades ago." The revelation caused a murmur among the staff. Mrs. Rose, the housekeeper, stepped closer. "Eleanor, was it you who paid for Mrs. Mary's grandson's treatment?" she asked. "How do you know about that?" "Mrs. Mary told me a mysterious nurse showed up at her door and paid for all of the boy's appointments. She said the woman told her it was an old debt the hospital owed her family." Eleanor nodded, moved. "Mrs. Mary's grandson received expired medication when he was 3 years old. He developed neurological problems that the doctors at the time said were developmental issues. He's 31 years old now and still needs treatment." Dr. Arthur was clearly shaken. He remembered the case, a boy who had arrived with a simple infection and left with inexplicable after-effects. "How many families have you helped, Eleanor?" "Every single one I could find. I spent every penny of my savings from the last 20 years on this." "But why?" Margaret asked, tears in her eyes. "Why would you do this alone?" "Because someone had to, and because I knew that one day I'd come back here to settle the score." Dr. Julian tried one last gambit. "Even if all of this is true, it was nearly 30 years ago. Nothing can be done about it now." "Oh, yes, it can," Eleanor smiled. "Because I didn't come here just to expose the past. I came to expose the present." She opened another file folder, this one clearly newer. "These are reports from the last 6 months, problems I documented while working as a janitor here during the night shift." "You worked here?" Dr. Arthur asked, surprised. "Mrs. Rose got me a temporary night cleaning job. I needed access to the hospital to confirm my suspicions." "What suspicions?" Margaret wanted to know. "That the practices didn't stop with the loss of Dr. Charles, that they continued. They just became more sophisticated." Eleanor showed a series of cell phone photos, revealing radiology equipment with expired inspection seals, disorganized medication cabinets, and falsified maintenance reports. "Julian, did you really think no one would notice that the equipment in the Public Health Service wing never gets proper maintenance?" Dr. Julian was cornered. He looked around searching for support, but found only shocked and disappointed faces. "Dr. Arthur, this is absurd. This woman is clearly disturbed, obsessed with conspiracy theories." "Julian," Dr. Arthur said firmly, "shut your mouth and let me examine these documents. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out." Now continuing. While Dr. Arthur studied the evidence, Eleanor addressed the staff members who had gathered around. "I know many of you have noticed strange things over the years. Patients who didn't improve the way they should have, equipment that failed at crucial moments, medications that seemed to have no effect." Several heads nodded in agreement. A nursing technician, Joanne, spoke up. "Eleanor, just last week I found it strange that the same antibiotic worked perfectly for a private patient, but made no difference at all for a public health service patient." "That's exactly what I'm talking about," Eleanor replied. "You're not crazy. You're right to be suspicious." Dr. Julian tried to interrupt. "You're being manipulated by a woman with psychological problems." "Julian!" Dr. Arthur exploded. "These documents are meticulously organized. These dates match our internal records. This woman has evidence that shows serious problems in our administration." "Dr. Arthur," Eleanor said calmly, "I didn't come here to destroy the hospital. I came to save it." "What do you mean?" "St. Jude's Medical Center can still be a place of true healing for everyone, not just for those who can afford it. But it needs to stop harming the most vulnerable." Eleanor pulled another set of papers from her bag, which seemed to be bottomless. "These are administrative restructuring proposals I developed, quality protocols that would guarantee equal treatment for all patients, regardless of social class." Dr. Arthur examined the proposals, impressed by the level of detail and professionalism. "Eleanor, these proposals they're excellent. How did you develop all this on your own?" "I never stopped being a nurse, Dr. Arthur. I just stopped practicing officially. I spent all these years studying, keeping up to date, observing other hospitals. I know exactly what needs to be changed here." "And what do you want in return?" Dr. Julian asked, trying to find the angle for blackmail. "I want the families to be properly compensated. I want the harmful practices to stop immediately. And I want this to never happen again." "And what about you? What's your price?" Eleanor looked at him with pity. "Julian, you still don't understand. I don't want anything for myself. I already paid the price my conscience demanded 28 years ago. Now it's time for you to pay the price for the choices you made." Dr. Arthur closed the proposals folder. "Eleanor, I need to take this to the administrative board immediately. This evidence is very serious." "Dr. Arthur, there's something you need to know first." "What?" "The situation is more serious than it seems. It's not just about expired medications or poorly maintained equipment." Eleanor picked up one last folder, this one marked confidential in red letters. Julian, do you remember the bed distribution system your father implemented? Dr. Julian tried not to answer, but Dr. Arthur pressed him with a look. Yes, I know the system. The system where private patients always get priority, even in emergencies. That's standard at any private hospital. Not when it results in delays that cause permanent damage to children, Eleanor interrupted. She opened the confidential folder, revealing a series of medical reports with photos of children. Here are 12 cases from the last 5 years where public health service children had complications because they were treated hours after arriving at the hospital, while private patients with less urgent cases were prioritized. Margaret picked up one of the reports and read it quickly. Eleanor, this child had cerebral palsy because her care was delayed 6 hours. Exactly. She arrived here at 2 in the morning with clear symptoms of pediatric stroke. She was seen at 8 in the morning because 3 private patients with less severe cases went ahead of her. Dr. Arthur was visibly shocked. Julian, is this true? We followed established protocols. Protocols that you yourself created, Eleanor added. Protocols that don't exist in any ethical medical manual. She showed another document. This is the internal protocol that Julian implemented 2 years ago. Officially, it talks about resource optimization. In practice, it's a clear instruction to give preference to patients who pay more. Dr. Arthur read the document twice, unable to believe what he was seeing. Julian, how could you implement something like this? It was necessary for the hospital's financial sustainability. Sustainability? Eleanor laughed bitterly. Julian, do you know what this hospital's annual profit is? She showed a detailed spreadsheet. $42 million last year. You could offer first-class treatment to all patients and still make a profit of $30 million. Where did you get these numbers? Dr. Julian demanded. From the hospital's income tax return, which is public. Anyone can access it. Margaret was examining the reports on the affected children. Eleanor, some of these family, I know them. They still come here for follow-up. I know, that's how I found out the practices were continuing. Some of those mothers recognized me when I was cleaning the hallways in the early morning. They told me their stories. And what did you do? What I always do. I listened, I helped as much as I could, and I documented everything. Eleanor showed a stack of handwritten testimonies. Here are the accounts from the families themselves, in their own words describing what they went through here. Dr. Arthur picked up one of the testimonies and began to read aloud. My daughter arrived here nearly losing her life. We spent 6 hours in the emergency room watching people who arrived after us cut in front of us. When they finally saw her, it was already too late. Today, she needs special care for the rest of her life. The silence in the hallway was absolute. Many staff members had tears in their eyes. Julian, Dr. Sterling said, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. How do you justify this? I just maintained the system my father created. Your father was a man of another era, Eleanor interrupted. You had the chance to be better than him. You chose to be worse. What do you mean worse? Your father at least felt guilt for what he did. He recorded that tape because he was confessing his mistakes to someone he respected. You do the same things with pride. Eleanor showed screenshots from social media. Here are your Instagram posts from the last few months. Photos at expensive restaurants, trips abroad, luxury cars, all paid for with money that should have been used to properly care for patients. My personal life has nothing to do with... It has everything to do with it, she interrupted. While you were spending $50,000 on a weekend in Paris, the MRI machine in the public health service wing stayed broken for 3 months. Dr. Sterling picked up another document. Eleanor, does this report show how many patients were harmed by the broken machine? 87 people had their diagnoses delayed. 17 developed complications that could have been avoided. 5 were left with permanent disabilities. The words fell like bombs in the hallway. Some staff members began to cry openly. And you know what else, Julian? Eleanor continued relentlessly. I have the names of all those people. I have their addresses. Some of them I visited personally. You did what? I went to their homes, I talked to them, I explained what really happened, and I helped however I could. Eleanor opened another folder, this one full of receipts and proof of payment. Here are the receipts for the treatments I paid for these families. Physical therapy for the girl who was left paralyzed. Consultations with specialists for the man who had the misdiagnosed stroke. Medication for the woman who developed heart problems. Dr. Sterling examined the receipts, impressed. Eleanor, how much did you spend on this? Everything I had, and everything I managed to earn over the last few years. But why? Why do this alone? Because it was the right thing to do, and because I knew that one day I would come back here to tell the whole truth. Dr. Julian was trying to find a way out. Dr. Sterling, even if some of these cases are true, we cannot be held responsible for decisions made decades ago. Yes, you can, Eleanor said firmly, especially when you kept making the same decisions. She showed more recent documents. Julian, do you remember the administrative board meeting in March of this year? Which meeting? The one where you decided to temporarily reduce the night staff to save money. Dr. Julian went pale. That meeting had been confidential. How do you know about that? Because I was cleaning the conference room that night, and because you forgot to turn off the audio system. The revelation caused total shock. Dr. Sterling had not attended that meeting and did not know about the decision. Julian, you reduced the night staff. It was a temporary measure to... Temporary? Eleanor showed a spreadsheet. It's been 4 months already. And do you know how many patients were harmed by the lack of staff during the early morning hours? Dr. Sterling grabbed the spreadsheet, his face turning red with anger. 38 poorly handled emergencies, 12 patients who had complications from lack of proper monitoring, and all of this to save $12,000 a month. Dr. Sterling, I can explain. Then explain, he shouted. Explain how you justify harming dozens of people to save the cost of a single private consultation. Julian had no answer. He looked around, looking for someone to support him, but found only looks of contempt and disappointment. Eleanor, Dr. Arthur turned to her, do you have proposals to correct this? I do. But first I need to show you one last thing. Eleanor picked up a sealed envelope different from the other documents. This envelope contains something I waited 28 years to deliver personally. What is it? A letter, written by a woman who passed away last year without ever knowing the truth about what happened to her here. Eleanor carefully opened the envelope, pulling out a letter written in shaky handwriting. To the nurse who cared for me with such kindness in 1999, I never knew your name, but I never forgot your kindness. You were the only person in this hospital who treated me like a human being. I spent all these years trying to find you to say thank you. If anyone knows who she is, please tell them Gladys O'Connor never forgot her. The silence that followed was broken only by the sobs of Margaret and the other staff members. Mrs. Rose was openly crying. Gladys wrote this 3 days before she passed, Eleanor continued. She searched for me for years, wanting to thank me for being the only one who treated her with dignity, but she could never find me, because I had been erased from the hospital's records. Eleanor, Margaret whispered. Gladys was... The woman, Julian said, had no class. The woman who cleaned this hospital for 30 years, who treated the Harrison family as if they were her own, who never knew she was slowly poisoned by the expired medications she received here. Dr. Julian was visibly shaken. Gladys had been like a second mother to him after his own mother passed away. Gladys never knew that you were responsible for her suffering, Eleanor continued. She passed away believing it had just been bad luck, that God had decided she was meant to suffer. Stop, Dr. Julian whispered. I'm not going to stop. You need to hear this. Gladys spent the last years of her life with constant pain, chronic digestive problems, extreme fatigue. All caused by the expired medication she received here in 1999. Eleanor showed Gladys's medical records. Here it is, all documented. The medication she received, with an expiration date 4 months past. The symptoms that began 2 weeks later. The progression of the illness over the years. Dr. Arthur was studying the records when he noticed something. Eleanor, who signed the prescription for this medication? Dr. Charles Harrison. Julian's father. The revelation hit Julian like a punch to the gut. He vaguely remembered that day when he had accompanied his father during consultations to learn about hospital administration. "Julian, you were present when your father prescribed that medication," Eleanor said softly. "You were 17. You were sitting in that chair next to the desk when Gladys came in for her appointment." "How can you remember such specific details?" "Because it was the day that changed my life forever." Eleanor sat down on one of the chairs in the hallway, suddenly looking very tired. "I was coming back from my shift when I overheard Gladys talking to your mother in the elevator. She was telling how Dr. Charles had been kind to her, how he had given her special medication that wouldn't cost anything. And then? I got curious because I knew we didn't have any free medication program back then. I went to check her records and found out the medication had been taken from the expired stock." Margaret covered her face with her hands. "Did you try to do anything at that moment?" "I tried to talk to Dr. Charles the next day. He told me it wasn't my business, that I should do my job and stop asking questions." "But you didn't stop." "No, I didn't. I started investigating other cases, and the more I found out, the more frightened I became." Eleanor stood up and walked to the corridor window. "You know what hurts me the most, Julian? It's not what your father did to me. It's that Gladys died believing you were good people. She never knew that the family she loved was responsible for all her suffering." Dr. Julian stepped closer to her. "Eleanor, I didn't know any of this back then. But you know now. And what are you going to do with that information?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" She turned to face him. "Julian, do you have children?" "I have an 8-year-old daughter." Imagine your daughter showing up here with an emergency and being left waiting for hours because someone decided her life is worth less than other children's. The image made Julian shudder. "That would never happen. My daughter has premium health insurance." "Exactly. That's why you never worried. Because you built a system where your children are protected, so it doesn't matter what happens to other people's children." Dr. Arthur had finished reviewing all the documents. "Eleanor, this evidence is enough to shut the hospital down temporarily." "I don't want to shut the hospital down, Dr. Arthur. I want to reform it." "How?" "First, adequate compensation for all affected families. Second, immediate implementation of the new quality protocols. Third, a complete audit of all administrative procedures." "And what about the leadership?" Eleanor looked directly at Julian. "Julian needs to decide what kind of man he wants to be, whether he wants to be like his father or whether he wants to be better." "What do you mean?" "Your father, at least, knew he was doing something wrong. The recording I have of him shows a man struggling with his conscience. You don't even seem to have a conscience to struggle with." The criticism hit Julian deeply. He remembered conversations with his father in the last years of his life, when Dr. Charles talked about regrets and missed opportunities to do good. "Did my father say something to you before he passed?" Julian asked, his voice barely audible. "He did. He came to see me in 2015, shortly before he passed. He was sick and wanted to make peace with me." "What? He never told me that." "Because he knew you wouldn't approve. He wanted to confess everything publicly, compensate the families, reform the hospital, but you were starting to take on more administrative responsibilities, and he was afraid of destroying your future." Julian sat down heavily in a nearby chair. "He really said that. His last words to me were, 'Eleanor, I hope my son is a better man than I was. I hope he does the right things I didn't have the courage to do.'" Tears began to stream down Julian's face. He remembered the final weeks of his father's life, when Dr. Charles spoke obsessively about fixing old mistakes and making peace with the past. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Julian asked. "Because I needed to be sure you had become the man your father hoped you would be. Unfortunately, I discovered you became a worse version of him." The harshness of Eleanor's words echoed through the hallway. Dr. Arthur broke the silence. "Eleanor, what happens now?" "Now you decide. You can try to cover this up like you did 28 years ago, or you can do the right thing." "And if we choose to do the right thing?" "Then I'll help you. I have detailed proposals to restructure the entire care system. I have contacts with medical ethics experts, and I have the trust of the affected families." Dr. Julian looked up, as if searching for guidance from the father who was no longer there. "And if I agree to your proposals, are you still going to make all of this public anyway?" "Julian, you still don't understand. I'm not here to blackmail you. I'm here to give you a chance to do what's right." "I don't understand. If you implement the changes, compensate the families, and make sure this never happens again, this bag goes back to my house and stays there. And if we don't? So all these documents are going to the press, to the medical board, to the district attorney's office, and to every affected family that still doesn't know the truth about what happened to them." Dr. Arthur nodded gravely. "Eleanor, I'm taking this to the board today. We have an emergency meeting." "Dr. Arthur, there's something else you need to know." "What?" "I didn't come here alone today." "What do you mean?" Eleanor smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "Dr. Arthur, do you remember Dr. Carolyn Thorne?" Dr. Arthur went pale. Dr. Carolyn was one of the most respected physicians in New Orleans, known for her work with underserved communities. "Of course I remember her. Why are you asking?" "Because she's here today, waiting in the parking lot." "Waiting for what?" "To find out the outcome of this conversation. If you choose to do the right thing, she'll come in and help implement the reforms. If you choose to try to bury this, then what?" "Then she'll use all her influence to make sure this story reaches every corner of New Orleans." The threat was real, and everyone knew it. Dr. Carolyn had connections at every major hospital in the city and was respected by both the medical community and the press. "How did she find out about all of this?" Dr. Julian asked. "Because I've worked with her for 5 years." "What do you mean?" "Dr. Julian, did you think I spent all those years just cleaning bathrooms? I volunteered at Dr. Carolyn's community clinic. She's the one who helped me organize all this evidence in a legally sound way." Dr. Arthur was impressed. "Eleanor, you planned this for years, for decades. Every document I collected, every family I visited, every piece of evidence I gathered, it was all part of a plan to come back here at the right moment." "And why now? Why not 5 or 10 years ago?" "Because I needed to be sure I had enough evidence. And because I needed to wait until Julian had full control of the hospital so he could be held accountable for his own choices." The strategy was brilliant, and everyone recognized it. Eleanor had waited for the perfect moment to return, when she had the strongest proof and the greatest impact. "Besides," she continued, "I needed to make sure I could offer solutions, not just problems. I spent years studying hospital administration, medical ethics, patient rights. I wanted to come back prepared to fix things, not just tear them down." Margaret approached Eleanor. "Eleanor, can you forgive me?" "Forgive you for what, Margaret?" "For not questioning your dismissal back then. For believing the rumors. For never reaching out to you. Margaret, there was no way for you to know. You were just a junior nurse at the time. You didn't have the power to question the medical director. But I should have tried. What matters is what you do now." Dr. Arthur closed all the folders and looked seriously at Julian. "Julian, you have a choice to make. You can try to fight this and probably lose your position, your medical license, and your reputation. Or you can cooperate with the reforms and maybe salvage some dignity. And if I cooperate, what happens to me?" "That depends on how genuine your remorse is," Eleanor replied, "and how much you're willing to do to repair the damage." "What do you mean?" "I mean there will need to be oversight. Someone needs to ensure the changes are actually implemented and maintained." "And who would provide that oversight?" Eleanor smiled enigmatically. "Someone who knows every trick that can be used to game the system. Someone with experience as both a nurse and an investigator. Someone who has the trust of the affected families." The implication was clear. Dr. Arthur understood immediately. "Eleanor, would you like to come back and work here?" "Not as a nurse. That part of my life ended a long time ago. But as an ethics and quality supervisor, yes." "Would you accept that, even after everything you went through here?" "I would accept it because it's the only way to ensure the changes are real and lasting." Dr. Julian stood up abruptly. "This is unacceptable. You can't put this woman in a position of authority over me." "Why not?" Dr. Arthur asked. "She clearly understands ethical hospital administration more than you do." Because she's poor," Because she came from the wrong side of town. Because she doesn't have an important last name. Eleanor finished. The same reasons you used to humiliate me an hour ago. Julian couldn't respond. The hypocrisy of his own words was too evident. Julian, Dr. Arthur said firmly, you will cooperate with the investigations and implementations that are necessary. That's not a suggestion. And if I refuse, then I will personally take all these documents to the medical board this afternoon. The threat was real. Dr. Arthur had enough credibility to be taken seriously by any regulatory body. Fine, Julian muttered. I'll cooperate. Cooperation isn't all I want, Eleanor said. I want genuine change. I want acknowledgement of what was done. I want a real commitment to never repeat these mistakes again. What exactly do you want from me? I want you to personally visit every affected family. I want you to look into the eyes of every mother who lost her child's health because of this hospital's decisions. I want you to understand the real impact of your administrative choices. The proposal made Julian swallow hard. The thought of facing the harmed families terrified him, and after that, if you truly understand the gravity of what happened, we'll talk about how you can help make things right, Dr. Arthur interjected. Eleanor, do you have an organized list of those families? I do. Here it is. She pulled yet another folder from her seemingly endless bag. The list contained names, addresses, summarized medical histories, and the current situation of each family. There are 127 families in total. Some have already received my help over the years. Others still don't even know they were harmed. Margaret examined the list and recognized several names. Eleanor, some of these people still come here for follow-up care. I know. It was by observing their returns that I confirmed many of their current health problems stem from the inadequate treatments of the past. What do you propose for these families? First, total honesty. They need to know what really happened. Second, proper medical treatment, free of charge for as long as necessary. Third, financial compensation for the damages suffered. Dr. Julian did the math quickly. That would cost millions. So what? Eleanor replied. The hospital profits $40 million a year. You can easily afford to take on that responsibility, but that would affect our expansion plans. Julian, Dr. Arthur exploded. You're still thinking about profit after everything you've heard here? I'm just being realistic about the costs. The costs? Eleanor laughed bitterly. Julian, do you know how much it cost me to spend 28 years helping these families on my own? How much? Everything I had, everything I managed to earn, everything I could have saved for my own retirement, I gave it all trying to fix the mistakes you made. The revelation left everyone in silence. Eleanor's generosity contrasted drastically with the hospital's greed. And why did you do it? Julian asked, genuinely confused. Because it was the right thing to do. Because someone needed to care about these people. And because I couldn't live with myself, knowing the truth and doing nothing. Margaret approached Eleanor. Eleanor, do you have a family? Children? No. I never married, never had children. I dedicated my entire life to trying to fix this injustice. You sacrificed your personal life for this. It wasn't sacrifice, it was choice, and I would do it again if necessary. Dr. Arthur Sterling was clearly emotional. Eleanor, this hospital needs people like you, people who truly care about patients above all else. This hospital has always had people like that, Dr. Sterling. They simply never had the power to make a real difference. What do you mean? Margaret here is one of those people. Mrs. Rose, too. The technician Joanne who spoke earlier. You have dedicated, ethical staff. The problem is the administrators who make the decisions. Julian felt attacked. Are you saying I'm a bad person? I'm saying you became a bad person, but you still have a chance to become a good one. How? By starting with acknowledging your mistakes, genuinely, not just in words but in actions. Eleanor grabbed a chair and sat down facing Julian. Julian, tell me, when was the last time you actually talked to a public health service patient? I oversee all the care. That's not what I asked. When was the last time you sat down with a poor patient, looked them in the eye, asked how they were feeling? Julian couldn't answer. Never, right? Because for you, these patients are just numbers on spreadsheets. That's not true. Yes, it is. And you know how I know, because I spent months watching you during the night shift. I saw how you treat private patients versus how you treat public health service ones. Eleanor showed a small notebook. Here are my notes from the nights I spent cleaning this hospital. Every interaction of yours I witnessed. Every comment I heard you make about humble patients. Dr. Arthur Sterling took the notebook and began flipping through it. Dr. Julian refused to see a public health service child in an emergency because it was his dinner time. Dr. Julian told a nurse that a social program patient could wait because they weren't a priority. Dr. Julian authorized the use of defective equipment for a public health service elderly woman's exam. Eleanor, you documented all of this. All of it. Every act of negligence, every prejudice, every decision that harmed someone in favor of economic concerns. Julian sat with his head in his hands. What do you want from me? What can I do to fix this? First, you're going to personally visit every family on this list. You're going to hear their stories. You're going to understand the real impact of what happened to them. All right. Second, you're going to immediately implement new protocols that guarantee equal treatment for all patients. How? I've prepared a complete manual. Protocols tested in other hospitals that manage to maintain high quality for all patients regardless of social class. Eleanor showed a thick, clearly professional document. Third, you're going to create a compensation fund for the affected families. How much? $5 million to start. It will be managed by an independent committee that will include representatives from the affected families. Dr. Julian swallowed hard. It was a lot of money, but he knew the hospital could afford it. And fourth, Eleanor continued, you're going to submit to constant supervision for a period of 2 years. Someone will monitor every administrative decision you make. And who would that person be? Me. The proposal left Julian in shock. The idea of working under the supervision of the woman he had humiliated an hour earlier was humiliating. You would agree to work here again, even after everything? I would agree to work here to ensure that no other person goes through what I went through, and that no patient is harmed the way those 127 families were. Dr. Arthur Sterling was impressed by the proposal. Eleanor, that's very generous of you. After everything you suffered here, you're still willing to come back to help. Doctor, Arthur, I never really left this place. I spent 28 years thinking about this place every day, dreaming of the day I could come back and do things right. And what if Julian won't accept those conditions? Then I'll leave right now and you all deal with the consequences. But he needs to understand that this is his only chance to do the right thing. Eleanor stood up and walked over to Julian, who was still sitting with his head down. Julian, your father told me something the last time we met. Want to know what it was? What? He said you were a good person deep down, but that you were being corrupted by power and money. He said he hoped something would happen to awaken the conscience he knew you had. And do you think that's happening right now? I hope so, because if it isn't, then your father was wrong about you. Julian raised his head and looked directly into Eleanor's eyes. What do you want me to say? Nothing. I want you to feel. I want you to truly understand what your decisions do to the lives of real people. And how do I do that? By starting to meet the people you've hurt. Eleanor picked up a photo from the folder of affected families. This is Mrs. Mary, 68 years old. She received expired medication in 1998 for diabetes treatment. She developed kidney complications that left her dependent on dialysis for the last 15 years. Julian examined the photo of the sweet-faced woman with tired eyes. She comes here for dialysis 3 times a week. You've seen her in the hallways, but you've never stopped to talk to her. How do you know I've seen her? Because I asked her. Mary remembers you walking through the dialysis unit several times. She always wanted to thank the doctors who take care of her, but she never knew how to approach the important doctor in the suit. The description made Julian flinch. He vaguely remembered an elderly woman who always tried to greet him when he passed through the dialysis unit, but whom he always ignored because he was in a hurry. "Do you want to meet Mary in person?" Eleanor asked. "Now?" "Now. She's here for her dialysis session." Julian hesitated. The idea of facing one of the direct victims of the policies he had implemented was terrifying. "Eleanor, I don't know if I'm ready for this." "No one is ever ready to face the consequences of their own mistakes, Julian. But it's necessary." Dr. Arthur supported the suggestion. "Julian, you need to do this. You need to understand the human impact of your decisions. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. That helps us a lot since we're just starting out." Now continuing, reluctantly Julian agreed. The group headed to the dialysis unit, where Mrs. Mary was connected to the machine, reading an old magazine to pass the time. "Mrs. Mary," Eleanor approached warmly, "how are you feeling today?" "Oh, sweetheart," Mary smiled broadly. "I'm doing well, thank God. And you, how are you?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Mary. I'd like to introduce someone to you." Eleanor signaled for Julian to come closer. "This is Dr. Julian Harrison, the hospital's medical director." Mary tried to get up to greet him, but the dialysis connections prevented her. "Doctor, what a pleasure. Are you the son of Doctor Charles, who used to take care of me back in the day?" Julian swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am, I am." "Oh, your father was such a good man. He took such loving care of me when I first started getting sick." Mary's words were like daggers into Julian's conscience. She spoke so fondly about the man who had caused her suffering. "Mrs. Mary," Eleanor said gently, "I need to tell you something important." "What is it, sweetheart?" "Do you remember the medication you took in 1999 when you started your diabetes treatment here?" "Yes, I do." "Dr. Charles said it was special, imported medicine." Julian closed his eyes, knowing what was coming next. "Mrs. Mary, those medicines were expired. That's why you developed kidney complications." Mary was silent for a long moment, processing the information. "What do you mean, dear?" "The hospital was giving expired medication to public health service patients. You were one of the people harmed." But Doctor, Charles was so kind to me." "He was kind, Mrs. Mary, but he also made very bad decisions that harmed you." Mary looked at Julian, confused. "Dr. Julian, is this true?" Julian struggled to find words. How could he explain to that sweet woman that his family had been responsible for nearly 20 years of her suffering? "Yes, ma'am, it's true, and I sincerely apologize for that." "You didn't do anything wrong, Doctor. You were just a boy back then." "But I kept doing wrong things after I grew up," Julian admitted to everyone's surprise. Mary reached her hand out to him. "Doctor, that's just how life is. Sometimes we make mistakes without meaning to. What matters is that we learn and try to do better." Mary's simplicity and kindness made Julian start to cry. How could that woman, who had suffered so much because of his family, still be so kind? "Mrs. Mary, do you forgive me?" "Of course I forgive you, my son. But you need to promise that you'll take better care of the other people who come here. I promise. And you'll give the good medicine to everyone, not just to those who have money." "Yes, Mom, I will." "Then everything is fine. We make mistakes, but we can also fix them." Eleanor was moved watching the interaction. This was exactly the reaction she expected from Mary, forgiveness mixed with wisdom. "Mrs. Mary," Eleanor said, "the hospital is going to help you from now on. We'll give you the best treatment possible." "Oh dear, I already receive good treatment here. The nurses are all very kind to me." "But you'll receive even better treatment, and you won't have to worry about the cost of your medicine anymore." "What do you mean?" Julian stepped forward. "Mrs. Mary, the hospital will pay for all your treatments from now on, and will also help with the medicine you need to take at home." "Is that true, Doctor?" "Yes, it is. It's the least we can do." Mary began to cry with emotion. "My God, what a blessing. I was so worried because I don't know how I'll be able to afford the new medicine the doctor prescribed." The interaction with Mary transformed something inside Julian. Seeing the real suffering caused by the abstract policies he implemented made the gravity of the situation finally become real to him. After saying goodbye to Mary, the group returned to the main hallway. Julian was visibly shaken. Eleanor, how many people like Mary are on your list? 127, Julian. Each one with a similar story. Each one suffering for years because of decisions made at this hospital. And you visited all of them? All the ones I could find. Some moved away, others are no longer with us. But the ones I found, yes, I visited personally. Dr. Arthur was impressed. Eleanor, that must have taken years. It did. I worked during the day and visited the families at night and on weekends. Sometimes I traveled to other cities when I found out someone had moved. And how did you locate them? Starting with the records I had kept, then following leads, asking neighbors, searching public records, sometimes even hiring private investigators when I had the money. Julian was trying to understand Eleanor's obsessive dedication. Why did you do all this? Why didn't you just go on with your life? Because I couldn't, Julian. Every night I went to sleep thinking about those families, asking if they were okay, if they needed help, if they knew what had really happened to them. Margaret grew emotional. Eleanor, you carried that guilt alone for nearly 30 years? It wasn't guilt, Margaret, it was responsibility. I was the only person who knew the whole truth. If I didn't do anything, who would? Dr. Arthur shook his head in admiration. Eleanor, you are one of the most principled people I've ever met. I'm just a person who can't pretend not to see the suffering of others. And now, what happens after we reveal all of this? Julian asked. Now you implement real changes, and I supervise to make sure they're maintained. How do you plan to do that supervision? By working here every day, following every administrative decision, regularly visiting the affected families, making sure the new protocols are followed. And what if we uncover other irregularities during that process? We fix them, simple as that. Dr. Arthur turned to Julian. Julian, are you willing to accept these conditions? Julian looked around, seeing the expectant faces of the staff, the determination in Eleanor's eyes, the moral authority of Dr. Arthur. I accept, he said finally. But I want it to be clear that I didn't know the extent of the problems. Julian, Eleanor said gently, not knowing isn't an excuse when you're responsible for knowing. You're the medical director. It's your obligation to know every aspect of how this hospital operates. You're right, and you need to understand that supervision isn't punishment, it's protection. Protection for the patients, protection for the staff, and protection for yourself. What do you mean, protection for me? Because when you start making ethical decisions, you sleep better. You look at yourself in the mirror without shame. You build a legacy you can be proud to leave for your daughter. The mention of his daughter touched Julian deeply. You know my daughter. Not personally, but I know she's 8 years old and that you want to set a good example for her. How do you know that? Because I've heard you talking about her with other doctors. You always talk about how you want her to be proud of you. And I do. Then start now. Do something she can truly admire when she grows up. Dr. Arthur clapped once, getting everyone's attention. Everyone, I need all of you to keep this conversation confidential until the board meets and makes official decisions. Dr. Arthur, Margaret asked, when will that happen? Today. I'll call an emergency meeting for this afternoon. And in the meantime? In the meantime, Julian and Eleanor will work together to start implementing immediate changes to the patient care protocols. Julian looked surprised. Together? Yes, Eleanor confirmed. If you're truly willing to change, there's no time to lose. Every day we go without implementing new protocols means more patients potentially harmed. What do you propose we do first? First, a full audit of all medications and equipment. Second, a meeting with the entire medical staff to explain the new protocols. Third, transparent communication with all families currently in treatment. Dr. Arthur nodded in approval. Eleanor, you've really thought of everything. I've had 28 years to think, Dr. Arthur. The group began to disperse, but the tension in the air had completely shifted. What had started as a public humiliation had turned into a moment of revelation and possible redemption. Eleanor, Margaret called before she walked away, can I ask you a personal question? Of course. Have you never regretted sacrificing so much of your life for this? Eleanor looked out the hallway window, watching the movement of the city below. Margaret, Have you ever woken up in the morning and looked at yourself in the mirror knowing you did the right thing, even though it cost you dearly? I think so. Then you understand why I've never regretted it. Margaret nodded, finally understanding the inner strength that had sustained Eleanor all those years. Eleanor, one last question. Go ahead. What's going to happen to that bag? Eleanor smiled and picked up the old bag, now empty of all its secrets. This bag is going to stay in my new office as a reminder. A reminder that the truth always finds a way to come to light. Your new office? Yes, Dr. Arthur has already offered me an official position as Ethics and Quality Supervisor. For the first time in 28 years, I'll have an official job in healthcare. Margaret hugged Eleanor warmly. Welcome back, boss. Thank you, Margaret. But now we're partners, not boss and subordinate. Dr. Julian approached hesitantly. Eleanor, I know my words might not mean much right now, but I'm truly sorry for everything. Julian, show me your regret through your actions, not your words. How? Starting right now. Let's go together and visit every department in the hospital, and you'll see with your own eyes how the practices you implemented affect the patients. All right. As they walked through the hallways, Eleanor began to explain the differences she had observed between the treatment of private patients and public health service patients. Julian, do you see that X-ray machine in the private wing? I do. It was bought last year with state-of-the-art technology. Now look at the machine in the public health service wing. Julian observed the visibly older, more worn-out equipment. How old is that machine? 12 years. And for 6 months it's needed specialized maintenance that you've refused to authorize. What's the cost of that maintenance? $80,000, the same amount you spent on your trip to Paris last month. The comparison was devastating. Julian began to understand how his personal choices had a direct impact on the quality of care. Eleanor, how do you know how much I spent in Paris? Because you posted photos at a restaurant I looked up, a €3,000 dinner for two. Converting to dollars, it would be enough to cover the maintenance of 2 important pieces of equipment. You investigated my personal life. I investigated your priorities, and I found out they don't include the well-being of the most vulnerable patients. They continued the tour of the hospital. In every department, Eleanor pointed out discrepancies between the treatment offered to different classes of patients. Julian began to see the hospital with completely different eyes. Eleanor, I never noticed these differences before, because you never wanted to notice them. It's easier not to see when you don't want to feel responsible. And now what do I do? Now you learn to see, and then you act to change what you see. They arrived at the pediatric department, where several children were waiting to be seen. Eleanor approached a mother who was waiting with a baby in her arms. Hi, Lucille. How's little Michael doing? Hi, Eleanor. The woman smiled. He's doing better, thank God. And thanks to you, too. Julian looked from one to the other, confused. Do you two know each other? Lucille is one of the mothers I helped, Eleanor explained. Michael was born here 2 years ago, with complications that could have been avoided if the fetal monitoring equipment had been working properly. Was the equipment broken? Not broken, just outdated and poorly calibrated. The readings weren't accurate, so the doctors didn't notice fetal distress in time. Lucille confirmed. The doctors said it was a natural complication of childbirth. Only after Eleanor explained the situation to me did I understand what really happened. And what did Eleanor do for the two of you? She paid for all of Michael's appointments with specialists. She paid for physical therapy, speech therapy, and occupational therapy. Everything he needed to develop well. Julian was growing increasingly impressed and embarrassed. And how much did that cost? $40,000 over 2 years, Eleanor replied. Money the hospital should have paid from the start. How did you come up with that much money? By working 3 jobs, cleaning houses in the morning, caring for the elderly in the afternoon, and cleaning offices at night. Eleanor's dedication was almost incomprehensible to Julian. And you did this for how many families? For everyone that needed it and that I was able to help. They continued visiting other units. At every stop, Eleanor introduced Julian to families she had helped over the years. Each story was more moving than the last. In the oncology wing, they met Mrs. Fern, a 70-year-old woman who had developed complications from improper medication back in the 90s. Dr. Julian, Mrs. Fern said, Eleanor told me you want to change things here at the hospital. Yes, Mum, we're working on that. That's good, Doctor, because I don't want other families to go through what mine went through. What did your family go through? My husband received improper treatment here in 1997. He passed away 3 years later from complications the doctors said were normal for his age. Only now, with Eleanor, did I learn it could have been prevented. Julian felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Mrs. Fern, I'm truly sorry about that. Thank you, Doctor. But what I really want is for you to make sure other husbands don't pass away leaving their wives alone because of medical error. I promise you, Mum. Then that's good. That's what matters. After visiting several units, Julian and Eleanor sat down in the hospital cafeteria to talk about the next steps. Eleanor, I need to understand something. How did you manage to hold on to hope all these years? Who said I held on to hope? What do you mean? Julian, there were so many times I thought about giving up. Times when I thought I would never be able to make a difference. What kept you going? The people. Every family I visited. Every child I helped. Every mother who thanked me. They gave me the strength to keep going. But you sacrificed so much, it wasn't sacrifice. It was investment. Investment in the idea that it's possible to do the right thing even when it's hard. And was it worth it? You tell me. This morning you were a man who humiliated humble people to feel superior. Now you're sitting here talking to me about how to improve the lives of vulnerable patients. Do you think it was worth it? Julian reflected on the question. I think today was the first day in many years that I can say I did something truly important. Then it was worth it. Dr. Arthur joined them at the cafeteria. Eleanor, I just spoke with the entire administrative board. They want to meet with you this afternoon. For what? To discuss your proposal officially, and to formalize your position as ethics and quality supervisor. And what about the affected families? The board has already approved the creation of the compensation fund, $5 million to start, as you suggested. Julian seemed surprised. They approved it that quickly. Julian, when I presented the evidence Eleanor brought, they immediately understood we had no choice. Either we fix this voluntarily, or we're forced to fix it by the regulatory agencies. And what about my situation? You keep your position, but under Eleanor's supervision for the next 2 years. Any major administrative decision needs her approval. And if I don't agree? Then you're fired and we hire someone who will, Dr. Arthur said without hesitation. Julian nodded slowly. All right, I accept the conditions. Eleanor stood up. Julian, there's one last thing I need to show you. What? Something that's in that bag, but I saved it for last. They returned to the main hallway where the bag was still on the table. Eleanor reached inside and pulled out one last envelope, clearly very old and yellowed. What is that? A letter I wrote to you in 2000, right after I was fired. For me? But I was only 17. Exactly. It was a letter to the young Julian, hoping that one day he would grow up and become different from his father. Eleanor handed the envelope to Julian. You can open it. Julian opened it carefully and began reading in silence. As he read, his expression shifted from surprise to deep emotion. Can you read it out loud? Dr. Sterling asked. Julian cleared his throat and began. Dear Julian, I know you're just a teenager now and have no control over the decisions your father makes. But I hope that when you grow up, you'll remember that there are humble people who depend on the kindness of people like you. I hope you'll be better than your father. I hope you'll use the power you'll have to help, not to harm. I hope that when you look back, you can be proud of the lives you saved, not the lives you could have saved. With affection and hope, Eleanor Miller. The hallway fell completely silent. Several staff members were openly crying. You wrote this 24 years ago, Julian asked, moved. I did. And I kept it, waiting for the day I could hand it to you in person. Why did you keep it for so long? Because I had hope that you would become the man your father wanted you to be. And now, do you still have hope? Now I have more than hope. I have evidence that change is possible. What evidence? The fact that you agreed to visit Maria da Conceição. The fact that you admitted your mistakes. The fact that you agreed to work under supervision. Those are evidence of character, Julian. Julian folded the letter carefully. Can I keep it? It's yours. It always was. Dr. Sterling interrupted the moment. Everyone, I need to go get ready for the board meeting. Eleanor, will you be available at 3 p.m.? I'll be here. And Julian, I hope you make good use of this second chance you're being given. I will, Dr. Sterling. I promise. After Dr. Sterling walked away, Julian and Eleanor were alone in the hallway. Eleanor, can I ask you something? Of course. What really motivated you to come back now, the real truth? Eleanor took a deep breath before answering. Because I found out that one of the children affected by this hospital's practices became a doctor, and she's graduating this year. What do you mean? Remember the girl who had neurological problems because of the expired medication in 1999, Mrs. Rose's granddaughter? Vaguely. Her name is Deborah. She's 31 now. And against all odds, she managed to graduate from medical school. Julian was stunned. Even with the neurological problems? It was very difficult. She needed special support throughout school. Took 6 years instead of 4 to finish medical school, but she made it. And where is she going to work? She wants to work here, at St. Jude's Medical Center. The revelation left Julian in shock. Here? At the hospital that caused her problems? Exactly. She doesn't know that's where it all started. She thinks she was born with the neurological problems. Are you going to tell her? That depends on you all. If you implement the reforms and treat her with the respect she deserves, maybe it will never be necessary to tell her. But if you try to treat her badly, then you tell her everything. Then I tell her everything. Julian realized this was another layer of Eleanor's strategy. She wasn't just correcting the past. She was protecting the future. When does she start working here? Next week, as a general practice resident. And have you already spoken with her? I have. She knows that a family friend managed to get a supervisor position here, and that she'll make sure she's treated well. She doesn't know you're that family friend. Not yet, but she'll find out when we meet officially. And do you think she'll react well when she finds out everything? I think she'll understand that I did what needed to be done. Deborah grew up watching the difficulties her family faced. She knows things aren't always fair in this world. Dr. Arthur returned, interrupting the conversation. Eleanor, Julian, the board moved the meeting up. They want to see you right now. Now? Yes, they're all very concerned about the legal implications of this situation. And how are they reacting to Eleanor's proposals? Julian asked. They're impressed, and relieved to have someone offering solutions instead of just problems. The trio headed to the board meeting room. Eleanor carried her old bag, now a symbol of her long journey in search of justice. Eleanor, Dr. Arthur said as they walked, the board has some questions about the practical implementation of your proposals. What kind of questions? Mostly about timeline and costs. They want to understand exactly how the changes will be implemented. I prepared detailed timelines for each phase of implementation. How long do you think it will take to completely overhaul the protocols? 6 months for basic patient care changes, a year for a complete overhaul of the administrative system, 2 years for full implementation of all proposed improvements. And the costs? High initially, but with guaranteed returns. A hospital with ethical protocols attracts better professionals, has fewer legal problems, and builds a better reputation. Julian was curious. Eleanor, how did you calculate those returns? By studying other hospitals that went through similar overhauls. I have data from 5 Brazilian hospitals that implemented strict ethical protocols over the last 10 years. And the results? Improved reputation, an increase in private patients who choose the hospital for ethical reasons, fewer lawsuits, a better work environment, and retention of good professionals. You really researched all of this? Julian, I dedicated 28 years of my life to understanding this problem. Of course, I researched every possible solution. They arrived at the meeting room, where 5 members of the administrative board were waiting for them. Eleanor recognized some faces from the time she worked there. Dr. Edward Brooks, she greeted one of the board members. Eleanor. Eleanor Miller. The man stood up, clearly shocked. But how? Where have you been all these years? Working to fix the mistakes this hospital made, Dr. Edward. We heard about the evidence you brought. This is very serious. It is. More serious than you can imagine. Eleanor was invited to sit at the board table. She placed her bag beside the chair and began systematically organizing her documents. "Gentlemen of the board," she began, "I brought evidence today of inappropriate practices that took place in this hospital for decades. But I didn't come here to destroy this institution. I came to save it." "What do you mean, save it?" asked Dr. Edward. "This hospital can become a benchmark for medical ethics in Brazil. It can be the first private hospital in the country to truly guarantee equal treatment for all patients. And how would that be possible? Through the reforms I proposed. Reforms that have been tested and approved in other countries, and that can be adapted to the Brazilian reality." Eleanor handed each board member a copy of her reform plan. "Here are the complete details: timeline, costs, expected benefits, and implementation method." The board members began examining the documents, impressed with the level of professionalism and detail. "Eleanor," said Dr. Edward, "this plan is extraordinary. How did you develop it on your own?" "I didn't develop it alone. I had help from Dr. Carolyn Thorne and other medical ethics specialists I consulted over the years." "Dr. Carolyn is involved in this?" "She reviewed all my proposals and approved them. In fact, she offered to oversee the implementation if you accept." "Doctor, Carolyn's name carried a lot of weight. All the board members knew and deeply respected her." "Eleanor," another board member, Dr. Paul Miller, asked, "would you really agree to come back and work here after everything you went through?" "I would, because I believe in the possibility of real change, and because it's the only way to ensure those changes are lasting." "And what exactly would your role be?" "Ethics and quality supervisor, responsible for ensuring all protocols are followed, that all patients receive proper treatment, and that no administrative decision compromises patient care." "Would that include oversight over Dr. Julian?" "It would include oversight over all administrative aspects that affect patients." Dr. Julian shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "And how long would this oversight last?" 2 years initially. After that, we assess whether it needs to continue." "Eleanor," Dr. Edward said, "your proposals are impressive, but the costs are significant." "Dr. Edward, you spent more money decorating the VIP wing than it cost to implement half of these reforms. How do you know how much we spent on the decoration?" "Because I have friends who work at the decorating company. They told me about the $4 million project to make the VIP wing more luxurious." The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. The decoration project had been one of the most controversial decisions of the year. "Eleanor," Dr. Paul said, "do you have proposals to reduce implementation costs?" "I do. We can implement it in phases, prioritizing the most urgent changes first." "What would the priorities be?" "First, auditing and replacing all inadequate medications and equipment. Second, training the entire staff on the new protocols. Third, transparent communication with affected families." "How much would the first phase cost?" "Approximately $1.5 million, which can easily be covered by the current budget without affecting other services." Dr. Edward jotted down some notes. "And the next phases?" "The second phase would cost $2 million, but it would be implemented over 6 months. The third phase would be mostly administrative work, costing about $500,000. $4 million total?" "Correct. Less than what you spent on the VIP wing decoration." The comparison was embarrassing but effective. The board members understood they couldn't argue about lack of resources. "Eleanor," Dr. Edward said, "there's a delicate matter we need to discuss." "What is it?" "The legal implications of all this. If these practices were truly systematic for so long, the hospital could face significant lawsuits." "You'll face lawsuits anyway, if you try to cover this up. The difference is that if you cooperate voluntarily, you can control how the situation is resolved." "Explain that better." "If you implement the reforms and compensate the families before they discover the truth on their own, you can present it as an ethical initiative by the hospital. If you try to hide it and the truth leaks out later, it will be seen as an attempt to cover it up. The logic was irrefutable. The board members understood that cooperating was the best strategy both ethically and practically. "Eleanor," Dr. Paul asked, "do you have assurance that the families will accept the proposed compensations?" "I do. Because I know these families. I know what they need and what they consider fair. And if some of them want more than we're offering, then you negotiate in good faith without trying to deceive or minimize the harm. And would you mediate these negotiations?" "If necessary, yes." Dr. Edward closed the proposal document. "Eleanor, the board accepts your proposals. Officially. All of them? All including your position as ethics and quality supervisor with authority over administrative decisions." Julian seemed both relieved and worried at the same time. "And when do we start?" "Now," Eleanor replied. "There's no time to lose. Where do we start?" "With the complete audit of medications. I want all inventories verified by the end of this week." "And the equipment?" "A maintenance and replacement schedule will be implemented next week." "Eleanor," Dr. Edward interrupted, "do you need any kind of administrative support to implement all this?" "I need a small but dedicated team, people who truly care about the patients." "Do you have any suggestions?" "Margaret Sullivan as Ethics Nursing Coordinator, Joanne Santos as Medication Protocol Supervisor, and I need to hire 2 external auditors for independent checks." "Approved. And I need a budget to start compensating the families immediately. How much do you need to get started?" $500,000 for the most urgent cases. The rest can be distributed over the coming months. Dr. Paul made a note. "Also approved." "And finally," Eleanor said, "I need Julian to understand that this isn't a punishment. It's an opportunity to rebuild his reputation and his character." Julian nodded. "I understand. And I'm genuinely willing to learn." "Then, let's start now." Eleanor stood up and grabbed her bag. "Julian, our first task is to visit the emergency department and observe how patients are being triaged." "All right." "And then we'll go to the pharmacy to check the expiration dates on all medications." "How long will that take?" "As long as it needs to. Julian, you need to understand that medical ethics isn't something you implement quickly. It's a continuous process of vigilance and care." They headed to the emergency department, where there was a mix of private and public health service patients waiting to be seen. Eleanor immediately noticed problematic patterns. "Julian, do you see anything strange here?" "What do you mean?" "Look at the order of care. 5 private patients arrived after that elderly lady over there, but they were all called before her." Julian observed and realized Eleanor was right. Maybe their cases were more urgent. Maybe. "Let's check." Eleanor approached the receptionist. "Hi, Carly. Can I see the triage chart for that lady?" "Of course, Eleanor." The receptionist handed over the chart, which showed medium urgency triage for severe abdominal pain. "And the charts of the patients who were seen before her?" Carly showed the other charts. 2 were low urgency, routine consultations that had been classified as emergencies. 1 was medium urgency, similar to the ladies, and 2 were truly high urgency. "Julian, do you see the problem? 2 of the private patients had lower priority than the lady, but they were seen first." "Exactly. This is the kind of thing that needs to stop immediately." Julian approached the receptionist. "Carly, why were private patients prioritized?" "Doctor, it's the protocol you yourself established. In case of equal urgency, private patients have preference." "And who taught you that?" "The administrative supervisor. She said it was your order." Julian looked at Eleanor, embarrassed. "Did I really establish that protocol?" "You did. It's here in the document I showed you earlier." "And I never thought about the practical consequences. Now you are. And now it can change." Dr. Julian turned once more to the receptionist. "Carly, from now on, triage is based solely on medical urgency. Type of health insurance doesn't influence the order of care." "Are you sure, Doctor? This is very different from what we've always done." "I'm sure. And if anyone questions it, tell them to come talk to me." Eleanor smiled, approving the first ethical decision she'd seen Julian make. "Very well. Now let's head to the pharmacy. In the pharmacy department, they found the head pharmacist, Dr. Beatrice White, organizing medications. "Dr. Beatrice," Eleanor greeted her. "How are the stock levels today?" "Hi, Eleanor. They're organized." "Why do you ask?" "Because we're going to do a full audit of expiration dates." "An audit? But I always check the dates." "I know you do your job well, Dr. Beatrice, but I need an independent verification to document that all medications are adequate." "Of course, where do we start?" "With the medications distributed to the Public Health Service ward. I want to check every batch." Dr. Julian followed along as Eleanor and Dr. Beatrice systematically checked each shelf. To his surprise, all medications were within their expiration dates. "Eleanor, everything seems to be in order here." "It is. Dr. Beatrice has always been very competent. The problem was never with her." "Then what was the problem?" "The problem was with purchasing. You all bought medications close to their expiration dates because they cost less." Eleanor showed documents of past purchases. "Here are the purchase orders from the 90s, always specifying discounted batches due to reduced shelf life." Dr. Beatrice examined the documents. "My God, Eleanor, they were buying medications that expired in 3 months. Sometimes less. And they distributed them first to Public Health Service patients, because if any were left over, there'd be no significant loss." Dr. Julian was visibly embarrassed. "I didn't know my father did that." "Now you do, and you can make sure it never happens again." "How?" "By implementing an ethical purchasing protocol. Only medications with a minimum shelf life of 18 months, and distribution based on arrival date, not patient type." Dr. Beatrice approved. "Eleanor, that's very sensible. I've always been concerned about these issues, but I never had the authority to change purchasing protocols. Now you do. As supervisor, I'll make sure your technical opinion is respected in all decisions regarding medications." "That would be incredible. For years I've suggested improvements that get ignored for cost reasons." Julian turned to Dr. Beatrice. "What kind of suggestions did you make that were ignored?" "Mainly about diversifying suppliers. We have exclusive contracts with distributors who don't always offer the best quality." "Why do those contracts exist?" "Because they provide commissions for the hospital, but they don't always have the best products." Eleanor nodded. "This is another aspect that needs to be reformed. Purchasing based on quality and medical need, not commissions." "How much does the hospital receive in commissions from these distributors?" Julian asked. "Approximately $300,000 a year," Dr. Beatrice replied. "And if we switched to suppliers with better quality, we'd lose the commissions, but we'd gain in treatment quality and reduction of medical complications." Eleanor explained, "Julian, medical complications cost far more than $300,000 a year, not to mention the human cost for patients." "You're right, let's change the contracts. Immediately." "Immediately." Dr. Beatrice smiled. "Dr. Julian, if I may, I'd like to suggest 3 suppliers who have excellent reputations and high-quality products." "Go ahead." "And they're all domestic, so we'd be supporting American industry too." The suggestion pleased everyone. Eleanor was satisfied, seeing that positive changes were already beginning to happen naturally. "Dr. Beatrice," Eleanor said, "would you like to be part of the team implementing the reforms?" "I'd love to. I've always dreamed of working in a hospital where ethics are a real priority." "Then welcome to the team." They continued the audit tour through the hospital's various departments. At each stop, Eleanor identified specific problems and proposed immediate solutions. In the imaging department, they discovered that technicians used different equipment for private patients and public health service patients. "Why the difference?" Julian asked the technician in charge. "Doctor, that was management's directive. Private patients use the new equipment. Public health service patients use the old equipment." "And what's the difference in exam quality?" "The new equipment produces much sharper images. It makes accurate diagnoses easier." Eleanor turned to Julian. "Do you see the problem? Inaccurate diagnoses lead to inadequate treatments." "Yes, I see it. And that changes now." Julian turned to the technician. "Starting today, all patients use the most appropriate equipment for their case, regardless of their insurance plan. Are you sure, Doctor? Absolutely. In the inpatient ward, they found glaring differences between private rooms and public health service rooms, not just in the decor but in the quality of basic equipment. Julian, Eleanor said, do you see any problem here? The public health service rooms have much older equipment. And does that affect treatment? Probably yes. Not probably, definitely. An outdated cardiac monitor might not detect dangerous arrhythmias in time. Julian examined the equipment more closely and was shocked by the condition of some of it. Eleanor, some of this equipment is truly unfit for medical use. Exactly. And it's been your responsibility for years. Why didn't anyone warn me before? Because you created a culture where no one questions your decisions. The staff learned that suggestions for improvement are seen as unwelcome criticism. Margaret, who had accompanied them throughout the tour, confirmed, Eleanor is right, Dr. Julian. We often wanted to suggest improvements, but we always got responses about budgetary limitations. And when it came to the private wing, well, there was always budget available then, a nursing technician commented. Julian was beginning to understand how his policies had created an environment of institutionalized inequality. Eleanor, how can I change this culture? First, by publicly admitting you were wrong. Second, by implementing visible changes quickly. Third, by creating channels for employees to suggest improvements without fear of retaliation. Can you help me with that? I can. In fact, I've already prepared a proposal to restructure the hospital's internal communication. Eleanor showed him another document. Here's an anonymous suggestion system, monthly meetings with representatives from each department, and protocols for rapid implementation of improvements. Would that work? It works in other hospitals. And it will work here if you truly support it. They concluded the tour at the end of the afternoon. Julian was mentally and emotionally exhausted, but there was also something different in his eyes, a deeper understanding of the responsibility he carried. Eleanor, he said when they returned to the conference room, I want you to know that today changed my perspective completely. How so? I always thought I was doing a good job because the hospital was profitable and there were no formal complaints. I never stopped to think about what I wasn't seeing, what I wasn't hearing. And now I understand that managing a hospital isn't just about financial numbers. It's about real human lives. Eleanor smiled genuinely for the first time. Julian, that understanding is the first step toward becoming a truly good administrator. You think I can become that? I think anyone can change if they really want to. The question is whether you truly want it. I do. After today, I can no longer ignore what I saw. Dr. Arthur Sterling returned with news from the board. Everyone, I have important updates. What are they? Eleanor asked. First, the board unanimously approved all of Eleanor's proposals. Second, they approved a $6 million budget for complete implementation of the reforms. $6 million? But I had asked for $4 million. The board decided to increase it to include additional improvements that weren't in the original proposals. What kind of improvements? Complete renovation of the public health service rooms to match the private ones, purchase of new equipment for the entire public health service wing, and creation of a scholarship program for professionals from underserved communities. Eleanor was moved. Dr. Arthur, this is more than I dreamed of achieving. Eleanor, after seeing your evidence and proposals, the board understood that this is an opportunity to completely transform the hospital's reputation. And the other hospitals in New Orleans? Do they know what's happening? Not yet, but once the reforms are implemented, we intend to use this hospital as a model for others. That would be incredible. Julian was processing the implications. Dr. Arthur, does this mean we're going to become a reference in medical ethics? Exactly. And you, Julian, will have the opportunity to lead this transformation. Under Eleanor's supervision. Yes, but leading nonetheless. Eleanor addressed Julian. Julian, there's something important I need to tell you about ethical leadership. What? A true leader isn't afraid of supervision. He welcomes it as an opportunity for growth. And what if I make mistakes during this process? You will make mistakes, we all do. The difference is that now you'll have someone to help you identify and correct those mistakes quickly. And after the 2 years of supervision? If you demonstrate real growth and consistent ethical decision-making, you'll continue as medical director with full autonomy. And if I don't, then someone more qualified will take the position. Eleanor's honesty was refreshing to Julian. He was used to people who only said what he wanted to hear. Eleanor, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Do you hold any grudge against me? Any desire for revenge? Julian, if I wanted revenge, I would have simply released all these documents to the press instead of giving you a chance to do the right thing. Then why are you being so generous with me? Because revenge doesn't fix anything, but real change can fix a lot. And you truly believe I can change? I believe anyone can change when they truly understand the impact of their actions, and today you began to understand. Dr. Arthur checked his watch. Everyone, it's 6 o'clock. The hospital is preparing for the night shift. Perfect, Eleanor said. Julian, would you like to join a night round to see how patients are treated when you're not around? Do you think there are differences? There are always differences between how things work during the day and during the night. Then let's stay. Great. And we'll take the opportunity to meet the night team and explain the new policies. During the night round, Julian discovered aspects of the hospital he had never observed. He saw how the night staff dealt with limited resources, how they improvised solutions, how they sometimes had to make difficult decisions due to lack of clear guidance. Eleanor, the night staff work under much harder conditions than the day staff. Because you always prioritize the day shift when the important patients are here. This needs to change. It does. And it will change. They visited several patients during the night. Julian actually talked with them for the first time in years, asking about their experiences at the hospital, their concerns, their needs. Dr. Julian, an elderly man said, you are very different from what I imagined. What do you mean? I always thought important doctors didn't care about simple people like me, but here you are talking to me, asking how I'm doing. And that matters to you. It matters a lot, Doctor. It makes us feel like people, not like numbers. The conversation touched Julian deeply. He began to understand that hospital administration wasn't just about efficiency and profit, but about human dignity. At 10 o'clock, they took a break in the hospital cafeteria. Julian was exhausted but also energized in a different way. Eleanor, I had never spent so much time talking directly with patients. And what did you think? That they are incredible people, full of stories, legitimate concerns, genuine gratitude for the care. And does that change anything for you? It changes everything. It's impossible to see these people as numbers after meeting them personally. Eleanor was satisfied with the progress. Julian, this is just the first day. Are you willing to do this regularly? I am. Actually, I want to implement weekly rounds where I talk directly with patients from every department. Excellent idea. And I want you to join me on these rounds, at least initially. Why? Because you see things that I don't see. You ask questions I wouldn't think to ask. All right, we can do that. Dr. Arthur found them in the cafeteria. How was the evening shift? Revealing, Julian replied. I discovered that I didn't really know the hospital I run. And how do you feel about that? Ashamed, but also motivated to do better. Eleanor, are you satisfied with the progress? I'm cautiously optimistic. Julian showed real openness to change today. And the next steps? Tomorrow we begin the official implementation of the new protocols, and we start the visits to the affected families. Julian swallowed hard when he remembered that part. Eleanor, will you come with me on these visits? On the first ones, yes. After that, you'll have to learn to do them on your own. And if the families react badly when they learn the truth, some will react badly at first. That's natural, but most will appreciate the honesty and the willingness to correct the mistakes. How can you be so sure? Because I've known these families for years. I know how they think, what they value, how they react to adversity. Dr. Arthur stood up. Folks, I'm heading home now. Eleanor, do you need anything to get ready for tomorrow? I need access to the hospital's administrative systems, and I need a desk where I can organize all the documents I brought. You can use my office, Julian offered. Are you sure? I am. Actually, I think it would be good for us to work in the same space during the first few weeks. Why? Because that way you can guide me in real time when I'm making important decisions. Eleanor approved of the idea. All right. But I want it to be clear that my supervision isn't to humiliate you, it's to educate you. I understand. And you need to be open to constructive criticism. I will be. And you need to be willing to change your mind when I show you that you're wrong. I'm willing. Dr. Arthur smiled. Folks, I think this partnership is going to work out very well. The next day, Eleanor arrived at the hospital early, carrying her old bag that was now a symbol of her victory. She went straight to Julian's office, where she found a desk set up for her with all the office supplies she might need. Good morning, Julian. Good morning, Eleanor. Did you sleep well? I did. And you? It was hard. I kept thinking about everything we discussed yesterday. And what conclusions did you reach? That I have a lot of work ahead of me to make up for past mistakes. You certainly do, but you're not alone in this work. Julian smiled. Eleanor began organizing the documents on the new desk, sorting the folders by implementation priority. Julian, our first task today is to prepare the communications for the families. They need to know what's going to happen before we start the visits. What kind of communication? A letter explaining that the hospital has identified some problems in past treatments and is taking measures to correct them. And what if they ask for specific details? Then you'll need to be prepared to tell them the complete truth. Julian sat down in his chair, watching Eleanor work. There was something fascinating about the methodical way she organized everything. Eleanor, can I ask you a question about your personal life? Go ahead. All these years helping those families, have you never felt lonely? Eleanor stopped organizing the papers and looked at him. Lonely how? Without a family of your own, without relationships, devoting all your energy to a project that might never have paid off. Julian, I've never felt lonely because I've always been surrounded by people who mattered to me. The families I helped became my family. But it's not the same as having your own children, a husband. No, it isn't. But it was the choice I made, and I don't regret it. Haven't you ever wanted a more traditional life? Eleanor sat down across from him. Julian, do you know what it means to have a purpose in life? I think I do. When you have a real purpose, a goal that goes beyond yourself, the sacrifices don't feel like sacrifices. They feel like investments. And your purpose was to ensure that no family ever went through what those 127 families went through, and now to ensure it never happens again. And now that you've succeeded, what will your next purpose be? To make this hospital a model for others, to show that it's possible to be profitable and ethical at the same time. Julian admired her determination. Eleanor, have you thought about having a family now? At 42, it's still possible. Julian, why are you asking that? Because I think you deserve to have personal happiness too, not just professional. Eleanor smiled. Who says I don't have personal happiness? Last night, when I got home after revealing the whole truth, was one of the happiest nights of my life. Why? Because I was finally able to do what I came here to do. I was finally able to put all those years of preparation to use for something concrete. A staff member knocked on the office door. Dr. Harrison, there's an urgent call for you. Who is it? Dr. Carolyn Thorne. Eleanor and Julian exchanged glances. Answer it, Eleanor said, and put it on speakerphone. Julian answered the call. Dr. Thorne, good morning. Good morning, Dr. Harrison. I'm calling to find out how yesterday's conversation with my friend Eleanor went. It was enlightening. I hope it was more than enlightening. I hope it was transformative. It was, Doctor. Great, because I need to let you know that representatives from the medical board will be visiting the hospital next week. Julian stopped breathing. What do you mean? It's a routine visit, but they're going to specifically examine the patient care and quality protocols. Eleanor signaled for Julian to stay calm. Dr. Thorne, Julian said, the hospital is implementing major reforms to the protocols. What kind of reforms? Eleanor is here with me. Would you like to speak with her? Of course. Eleanor picked up the phone. Hi, Carolyn. Eleanor, how did yesterday go? Did he accept your proposals? He accepted all of them. The board approved a budget of $6 million for full implementation. $6 million? That's more than we expected. It was a pleasant surprise. Julian is truly willing to cooperate. And the families? When do the compensation payments begin? This week. Julian is going to personally visit each family to explain the situation. He agreed to that? He did. Actually, it was his idea after he met Mrs. Mary Gladys. Wow, that's real progress. Carolyn, about the medical board visit? Don't worry. If the reforms are underway, it'll just be a positive routine check. And if they aren't? Then we'll have problems, but I trust you to make sure they are. After the phone call, Julian was visibly nervous. Eleanor, 1 week is very little time to implement visible changes. It's enough time if we start now and work intensively. What do we need to prioritize? Medication audit, updating critical equipment and basic staff training on the new protocols. And the visits to the families? We start this afternoon with the families that live right here in New Orleans. How many are there? 83. The others moved to other cities over the years. And how are we going to organize these visits? 3 families a day, 1-hour conversations with each one. You'll listen to their stories, understand their suffering, and explain how the hospital will compensate them. And if a family refuses to receive us, some will refuse at first. That's understandable, but most will accept when they understand that we're being sincere. Julian took a deep breath. Eleanor, I'm nervous about these visits. It's normal to be nervous. It shows you understand the seriousness of the situation. Can you give me tips on how to approach these families? First rule, total honesty. Don't try to downplay what happened or make excuses. Second rule, listen more than you talk. Let them tell their stories completely before you talk about compensation. And third, show genuine remorse, not through pretty words but through concrete actions. At 9 o'clock, they started the first official medication audit. Dr. Beatrice White joined them, along with 2 external auditors Eleanor had hired. Everyone, Eleanor said to the team, we're going to check all medications in all wards. Anything with less than 6 months of shelf life, we set aside for special analysis. And if we find expired medications, one of the auditors asked, immediate disposal and a full report on how they got here. The audit lasted 4 hours. To everyone's relief, they didn't find expired medications, but they found several with very short expiration dates. Eleanor, Dr. Beatrice White reported, we found 43 medications with less than 3 months of shelf life, all destined for which ward? Mostly the public health service ward, some for the private ward too. Julian, do you see the pattern? I do. We're still buying medications close to their expiration date. And that stops today. I want a meeting with all suppliers to renegotiate contracts. When? Tomorrow morning. Julian took notes quickly. Eleanor, can you help me with this meeting? I've never negotiated contracts focused on quality over price. I can. Actually, I already have a list of alternative suppliers that prioritize quality. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they prepared for the first visit to an affected family. Eleanor had chosen to start with Mrs. Lucille, a 69-year-old woman who had been harmed by improper medication in 1998. Julian, Mrs. Lucille is a very direct person. She's going to ask tough questions. What kind of questions? She'll want to know why it took so long for you to acknowledge the mistake. She'll want details on how it affected other patients. And she'll want guarantees that it will never happen again. And how should I respond? With total honesty, even if it's uncomfortable. They arrived at Mrs. Lucille's modest home in the mid-city neighborhood. The lady received them in the living room, offering coffee and homemade cookies. Eleanor, my dear, how good to see you. She hugged Eleanor warmly. And this must be the doctor you mentioned. Yes, Mrs. Lucille. This is Dr. Julian Harrison, Director of St. Jude's Medical Center. Doctor, a pleasure. Have a seat. Make yourself at home. Julian sat down nervously, impressed by the woman's hospitality. "Mrs. Lucille, I came here to talk about the treatment you received at our hospital a few years ago." "Oh yes, Eleanor told me you discovered some problems. We discovered that you received improper medication that caused long-lasting health complications." Mrs. Lucille nodded calmly. "And you came to apologize?" "I did. And also to explain how we're going to make up for the harm." "Doctor, may I ask you a question?" "Of course, Ma'am. Did you know this was happening at the time?" Julian hesitated, but remembered Eleanor's advice about total honesty. "I didn't know specifically about your case, Mrs. Lucille, but I knew the hospital had questionable practices, and I did nothing to change them." "And why didn't you?" "Because it was easier to ignore, because it didn't directly affect my family, because I was more concerned with profits than with people." Julian's brutal honesty surprised even Eleanor. "And have you changed your mind now?" "I have. After meeting people like you, I can no longer ignore the human impact of my decisions." Mrs. Lucille studied Julian's face for a long moment. "Doctor, you seem like a sincere man. That means a lot to me." "Thank you, Ma'am. But sincerity isn't enough. You need to prove you've changed through your actions. And how can I do that? By taking good care of other people who are going through now what I went through years ago. Do you have specific suggestions?" "I do. I have a neighbor, Mrs. Hope, who's receiving treatment at your hospital right now. I want you to take good care of her." "Of course. What's her full name?" "Hope Ferguson. She has diabetes and goes there 3 times a week." Julian made a note to check on Mrs. Hope's case. "Anything else, Mrs. Lucille? I want you to visit me here at home once a month to tell me how the changes at the hospital are going." "You want me to come here monthly?" "Yes, because that way I'll know if you're really keeping your promises or if it's just pretty talk." Eleanor smiled, approving of Mrs. Lucille's demand. "All right, Ma'am. I'll come here every month to report on our progress." Then it settled. Mrs. Lucille got up and went to the kitchen, returning with a folder tied with string. "Doctor, I want to show you something." She opened the folder, revealing dozens of medical prescriptions, test results, and consultation reports from the last 25 years. "This is the story of my illness, of everything I went through because of that bad medicine I received at your hospital." Julian examined the documents, seeing the progression of complications over the years. "Mrs. Lucille, you kept all of this." "I kept it because I always knew that one day someone would want to understand what happened to me." "And you always suspected it was medical error?" "I suspected because I was healthy before that treatment. After the medicine, I was never the same." "Why did you never sue the hospital?" "Because I didn't have money for a lawyer, and because I didn't know how to prove the problem was caused there." Eleanor intervened. "Mrs. Lucille, now you have all the proof needed, but instead of a lawsuit, the hospital is going to compensate you voluntarily." "How?" "First, all your treatments from now on will be free and with priority. Second, financial compensation for the years of suffering. Third, a formal apology from the hospital." "And how much compensation?" Julian looked at Eleanor, who signaled for him to answer. "We're thinking $50,000, Mrs. Lucille." The woman was silent for a moment. "Doctor, this is a lot of money. You deserve much more than this. It's the least we can do." "And how do I know you'll follow through?" "Because Eleanor will supervise everything personally, and because we'll sign an official contract." Mrs. Lucille looked at Eleanor. "Eleanor, do you trust this doctor?" "I'm starting to trust him, Mrs. Lucille, but I'll keep an eye on him to make sure. Then all right, I accept." After saying goodbye to Mrs. Lucille, Julian was clearly emotional in the car. "Eleanor, how do you keep your composure in situations like this?" "What do you mean?" "Seeing the suffering we've caused, hearing these stories, it's devastating." "It really is devastating, but it's also necessary. You need to feel the weight of your decisions in order to make better decisions in the future. And what if I can't handle it emotionally? Then you seek help. You go to therapy. You talk to someone you trust. You seek support. But you don't use that as an excuse to go back to your old ways." "Did you go to therapy during these years?" "I did." For a long time, it was the only way I could deal with the guilt and the anger I felt. Guilt about what? For not having been able to stop those families from being harmed back then. But you tried. I tried, but I couldn't, and that tormented me for years. What helped you get through it? Understanding that I can't change the past, but I can influence the future. They made 2 more visits that afternoon. Each family reacted differently, but all of them showed appreciation for the honesty and the commitment to change. At Mr. John's house, a 73-year-old man who had developed heart problems due to improper medication, the conversation was more tense. "Doctor," Mr. John said, "do you know how many years of life I lost because of your mistake?" "I don't know, sir." 15 years. 15 years that I could have spent working, traveling with my wife, playing with my grandchildren. Instead, I spent them taking care of my health. Julian didn't know what to say. "Mr. John, I know that nothing I say will give you those years back. Nothing at all. But I can guarantee that we'll do everything in our power to make up for the harm and ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else." "How?" "Paying for all your treatments, providing financial compensation, and completely overhauling our protocols." Mr. John looked at Eleanor. "Eleanor, do you believe he'll follow through on this?" "I believe he's trying to be a better person, and I'll supervise to make sure he does." "Then all right, then. But I want it to be clear that money isn't what matters most." "What matters most?" Julian asked. "That you understand that behind every medical error there is an entire family that suffers. It's not just the patient, it's the wife who has to take care of him, the children who worry, the grandchildren who don't understand why Grandpa is always sick." Mr. John's perspective opened a new dimension of understanding for Julian. "You're right. I had never thought about the family impact of medical errors." "Well, you should, because when you make a mistake with one person, you're actually making a mistake with an entire family. How can I take that into consideration in future administrative decisions? By always asking, if it were my family, would I be satisfied with this treatment? That's a good rule. It's the only rule that truly matters." On the 3rd visit of the day, they met Mrs. Antonia, a 67-year-old woman who had partially lost her vision due to complications from improper medication. "Dr. Harrison," she said, "I can no longer see my grandchildren's faces clearly. Do you know what that means for a grandmother?" "I don't know, ma'am, but I imagine it's very painful. It's more than painful. It's a loss that hurts every day." "Mrs. Antonia, how can I make up for something like that? You can't give me back my sight, doctor, but you can make sure other grandmothers don't lose sight of their grandchildren." "How?" "By treating every patient as if they were your own mother." "And what about financial compensation?" "I'll accept it because I need it. But what I really want is the promise that this won't happen to anyone else." "You have my word." "Talk is cheap, doctor. I want to see action." "What kind of action?" "I want you to send Eleanor here once a month to tell me how things are at the hospital. If she says everything is fine, I'll believe it." Julian looked at Eleanor, who nodded in agreement. "All right, Mrs. Antonia. Eleanor will come here monthly. And what if she tells me you've gone back to your old habits? Then you can hold me personally accountable." "You can be sure I will." On the way back to the hospital, Julian was deeply silent. "Julian, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that those 3 ladies are wiser than any administrative advisor I've ever met." "Why do you say that?" "Because they understand that the most important thing isn't money. It's trust. It's the assurance that other people won't go through the same suffering." "And does that change anything in how you see your role as director?" "It changes everything. I always thought my responsibility was to the hospital's numbers. Now I understand that my responsibility is to the people." "Julian, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course." "I was prepared to fight you for months. I was expecting resistance, denial, attempts at blackmail. And why wasn't there any? Because you have something your father didn't have at the same age." "What?" "The ability to admit you're wrong. Your father took decades to recognize his mistakes. You recognized yours in a day. Maybe because I had you to show me the consequences so clearly. Or maybe because you're fundamentally a good person who was making bad decisions." Julian reflected on that. "Eleanor, do you think I can become a good medical director?" I think you can become an excellent medical director, but only if you keep the humility you showed today. How can I keep it? By never forgetting the faces of the people we visited today. By never forgetting that behind every administrative decision, there's a real family that will be affected. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The next day, the meeting with suppliers revealed more problems than Julian had imagined. Eleanor conducted the negotiations with expertise that impressed everyone. Gentlemen, representatives, she told the suppliers, St. Jude's Medical Center is implementing new quality protocols that require higher standards from all our partners. What kind of standards? One of the representatives asked. Medications with a minimum shelf life of 18 months, equipment with preventive maintenance guarantees, and complete transparency about the origin and quality of the products. That will significantly increase costs. We prefer quality over low price, Julian interrupted. We don't negotiate when it comes to our patients' health. Eleanor smiled proudly as she watched Julian take a firm stance on ethical issues. And what if we can't meet those requirements? Another supplier asked. Then we'll find partners who can, Eleanor replied. We already have 3 alternative suppliers interested in working with us under those standards. Can you give us a few weeks to adapt? 2 weeks. After that, all inadequate contracts will be terminated. After the meeting, Julian was impressed. Eleanor, where did you learn to negotiate like that? By watching you and other administrators over the years. I learned how the game works, but now I'm playing for the right side. And do the alternative suppliers really exist? They do. In fact, they're companies that always wanted to work with ethical hospitals, but they couldn't compete with low prices based on reduced quality. Have you contacted them already? For months. I've been preparing for this moment for a long time. At 10 o'clock, the news that would change the entire course of the situation arrived. Margaret ran to Julian's office. Dr. Julian, Eleanor, you need to see this. What happened? Eleanor asked. A reporter from the local newspaper showed up. She says she has information about historical irregularities at the hospital. Julian went pale. How did she find out? I don't know. But she wants to speak specifically with you, Dr. Julian. Eleanor and Julian exchanged looks. Eleanor, did you tell anyone about our conversation? I didn't. But what? But I warned that if the changes didn't happen quickly, other people might take independent action. Other people? Some of the affected families have children who work at newspapers, TV stations, and social media companies. They've known for years that something was wrong, but they didn't have proof. And now they do. Now they know someone finally brought proof, and they may be taking matters into their own hands. Julian ran his hand through his hair, nervous. What do? We face it, with honesty and transparency. Do you think we should talk to the reporter? I think we should invite her to see the reforms we're implementing. What do you mean? Instead of trying to hide the problems, we're going to show the solutions. We're going to turn a crisis into an opportunity to demonstrate ethical leadership. Julian hesitated. What if she asks questions we don't know how to answer? Then we honestly answer that we don't know, but that we're investigating. What if she wants to talk to the affected families? Then we facilitate the contact. Total transparency, remember? Dr. Arthur appeared at the door. Julian, the reporter is insisting on talking to you. She says she has a deadline to publish the story tonight. Tonight? Julian panicked. Calm down, Eleanor said. Let's go downstairs and talk to her. You're coming with me? I am, but you need to lead the conversation. What if I say something wrong? Then I'll correct you, but I trust you'll say the right things. They went down to the hospital lobby, where they found a young woman with a recorder and camera. Dr. Julian Harrison, she approached. I'm Patricia Owens from the New Orleans Gazette. I need to talk to you about serious allegations against this hospital. What kind of allegations? Systematic use of expired medication on public health service patients during the 90s, discrimination in patient care, administrative negligence that caused permanent harm to dozens of families. Julian took a deep breath, remembering Eleanor's advice about honesty. I can confirm that we identified serious problems in this hospital's historical protocols, and we're taking immediate measures to correct them. Patricia seemed surprised by the direct response. You're confirming the allegations? I'm confirming that our internal investigation identified inadequate practices that harmed patients over the years. And what are you doing about it? Implementing a complete overhaul of administrative and medical protocols, financially compensating the affected families, and ensuring this never happens again. Who's leading these reforms? Julian looked at Eleanor. This is Eleanor Miller, our new Ethics and Quality Supervisor. She brought the evidence that allowed us to identify the problems. Patricia turned to Eleanor. Ms. Miller, have you worked here long? I worked here as head nurse between 1996 and 2000. I recently came back to help with the reforms. And do you have evidence of these historical problems? I have complete evidence. Documents, reports, medical records, everything properly organized. Would you be willing to share this evidence? Eleanor looked at Julian, who nodded. I am, but I want it to be clear that the hospital is voluntarily cooperating to correct the problems. What do you mean? No one was forcing them to make these reforms. They chose to do the right thing when they learned the truth. Patricia made several notes. Dr. Harrison, how much is the hospital going to spend on these reforms? $6 million for the complete renovations, plus $5 million in compensation for the families. $11 million in total. Correct. And won't this affect the hospital's financial viability? No. In fact, we expect the reforms to improve our reputation and attract more patients who value medical ethics. Patricia was clearly impressed by the transparency of the responses. Can I speak with some of the affected families? You can, Eleanor replied, but I'd like you to respect their privacy and not exploit their suffering for sensationalism. Of course, can you facilitate the contact? We can, with the family's permission, of course. And can I visit the hospital to see the renovations in progress? You can come whenever you like, Julian said. We have nothing to hide. After the journalist left, Julian was nervous. Eleanor, do you think we did the right thing talking to her? We did. Transparency is always better than trying to cover things up. What if the article comes out negative? Then we work to show that the criticism was heard and that real changes are happening. You're very confident about that. I am, because I know we're doing the right thing. And when you do the right thing, you don't have to be afraid of the truth. The next day, the article was published under the headline, New Orleans Hospital Acknowledges Historical Errors and Implements Pioneering Ethical Reforms. The tone was positive, highlighting the hospital's transparency and proactivity. Eleanor, Julian said, relieved, the article turned out much better than I expected. Because you were honest with the journalist. She respected that. And now? Now we're going to get a lot of attention from the media and from other hospitals. We need to be prepared to serve as an example. That makes me nervous. It's normal, but it's also motivating. Now you have an extra incentive to do things right. Over the following days, they implemented changes at a rapid pace. The equipment audit revealed even more serious problems than they had expected. Julian, the technician in charge, reported, we found X-ray equipment in the public health service ward that hasn't been maintained in 3 years. 3 years? How is that possible? Because the maintenance cost $50,000 and was considered not a priority by the previous administration. My administration, Julian admitted. Yes, sir. And what are the risks of this outdated equipment? Low-quality images that can lead to misdiagnoses and radiation exposure higher than necessary. Julian turned to Eleanor. How many patients were exposed to these risks? Over the last 3 years, approximately 2,000 people. 2,000. Julian was shocked, and some of them probably had their diagnoses compromised by the poor quality of the images. How do we identify these people? By cross-referencing test records with inconclusive results or that had to be repeated elsewhere. And how do we compensate for this kind of harm? By offering free new tests with proper equipment and treatment for any problem that was misdiagnosed. That's going to cost a fortune. Julian, remember what Mr. John said. Behind every medical error, there's an entire family that suffers. You're right, we'll do the new tests for everyone. Implementation of the reforms continued intensively. Eleanor worked 16 hours a day, overseeing every aspect of the transformation. "Eleanor," Margaret commented, "you're working too hard. You need to rest." "I can't rest yet. We only have 1 week before the medical board visit." "But you're going to exhaust yourself." "Margaret, I waited 28 years for this opportunity. I'm not going to waste it over being tired. And after everything is in place, will you be able to relax? Once everything is running perfectly, then I can relax." Julian, who had been listening to the conversation, interrupted. "Eleanor, Margaret is right. You're killing yourself with work." "Julian, I'm fine." "No, you're not. You got here at 5 in the morning and still haven't stopped for lunch. There's so much to do. And you won't be able to do any of it if you collapse from exhaustion." Julian made a decision. "Starting today, you work a maximum of 10 hours a day, and always with proper meal breaks." "Julian, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is. I'm learning to take better care of people, and that includes taking care of you too." Eleanor was moved by his genuine concern. "Fine, but only after the medical board audit is over." "Deal." On Wednesday, 3 days before the audit, unexpected news arrived. Dr. Arthur sought out Julian and Eleanor urgently. "Folks, we have a situation." "What happened?" Eleanor asked. "I got a call from Dr. Ferdinand Castle, the director of St. Anthony's Memorial." Julian knew Dr. Ferdinand, a direct competitor. "What did he want?" "He wants details about our reforms. He says he's under pressure from patients' families to implement similar changes." "What do you mean, pressure?" "It seems word about our reforms has spread through the medical community. Other hospitals are being questioned about their own practices." Eleanor smiled. "That's great. It's exactly what we hoped would happen." "What do you mean?" "When one hospital starts doing the right thing, it creates natural pressure for others to do the same." "And does Dr. Ferdinand want our help?" "He wants me to consult for them on implementing ethical protocols." Julian was surprised. "Would you accept?" "I would, but only after our reforms are fully implemented." "Why only after?" "Because I want to make sure our model actually works before recommending it to others." Dr. Arthur had more news. "There's something else. The medical board moved the visit up to tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Julian panicked. "But we're still implementing the changes." "Calm down," Eleanor said. "We've implemented enough to show real progress. Are you sure?" "I am. Complete medication audit, new triage protocols implemented, critical equipment updated, and basic staff training done." "And the compensation to the families?" "It's already started. 15 families received their first payments yesterday." Dr. Arthur nodded approvingly. "Eleanor, you really managed to implement significant changes in just 1 week." "We managed," she corrected. "Julian worked hard to support every change." "That's true. Julian, you should be proud of your dedication." "Thank you, Dr. Arthur, but the credit goes to Eleanor. She showed me the way." "You two make a great team." On the eve of the audit, Eleanor and Julian worked late putting together all the documentation that would be presented to the auditors. "Eleanor," Julian said at 10 o'clock, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you nervous about tomorrow's audit?" "I'm anxious, but not nervous." "What's the difference?" "Nervous would be if I weren't sure we did everything right. Anxious is because I really want everything to go well." "And what if the auditors aren't satisfied?" "Then we fix whatever needs fixing and keep improving." "Are you always this confident?" "Not always." "But when you know you're doing the right thing, confidence comes naturally." Julian organized the last documents. "Eleanor, regardless of what happens tomorrow, I want you to know that this week changed my life." "How?" "For the first time in years, I'm going to sleep tonight, knowing I did something truly important. That my decisions helped people instead of hurting them. And how does that make you feel?" "Good. Really good. It's a feeling I had forgotten existed. That's how I felt when I was a nurse here. That's why I loved this job so much. And that's why you suffered so much when you were taken away from here." "I did. But now I'm back, and this time, no one is going to take me away from here until the work is completely finished." On the day of the audit, the medical board representatives arrived at 8 in the morning. They were 3 senior doctors, with a reputation for being strict but fair. Dr. Harrison, the team leader, Dr. Henry Grant, introduced himself. We're here for the routine audit of quality protocols. Doctor, welcome. This is Eleanor Miller, our Ethics and Quality Supervisor. Pleasure, Dr. Henry greeted Eleanor. Can you explain the current protocols to us? I can. In fact, we've implemented significant reforms recently that I'd like to present. What kind of reforms? Standardization of care regardless of social class, a complete audit of medications and equipment, and the creation of a continuous ethical oversight system. Dr. Henry seemed intrigued. Were these reforms motivated by any specific problem? They were motivated by the identification of improper practices that had existed for years without adequate oversight. Can you be more specific? I can, and I have all the documentation organized to present. During the presentation, which lasted 3 hours, the auditors meticulously examined every piece of evidence Eleanor had collected and every reform that had been implemented. Ms. Miller, Dr. Henry said, this documentation is extraordinarily detailed. Doctor, I spent years collecting this evidence, and the reforms implemented are exactly what we would recommend to correct these problems. Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Harrison, another auditor addressed him, as medical director, how do you evaluate the changes that were implemented? Doctor, I can honestly say that these changes have completely transformed the way we operate. In what sense? Now every decision I make is based first on patient well-being, then on financial considerations. And is that economically sustainable? We've found that it is. In fact, the reduction in complications and legal issues is already generating savings that offset the costs of the reforms. The auditors visited every department of the hospital, spoke with staff from different shifts, and examined equipment and medications. Dr. Harrison, Dr. Henry said at the end of the visit, I have to say we're impressed. Why? We rarely see such comprehensive reforms implemented so quickly, and it's even rarer to see a hospital admit to historical mistakes and take responsibility for correcting them. The credit goes to Eleanor. The credit goes to both of you, and also to the team that supported the changes. So our audit passed. More than passed. We'd like to use this hospital as an example for others on how to implement effective ethical protocols. Eleanor and Julian looked at each other, relieved and proud. There's just one recommendation I'd like to make, Dr. Henry continued. What is it? Eleanor asked. Document the entire reform process and turn it into a manual that can be used by other hospitals. That's an excellent idea, Julian agreed, and consider presenting this experience at the next National Medical Ethics Conference. Would we do a presentation together? Julian asked Eleanor. We would. It would be important to show that collaboration between administration and ethical supervision can generate positive results. After the auditors left, Julian and Eleanor sat in his office to process what had happened. Eleanor, I can't believe we did it. Did what? Turned a potentially catastrophic situation into something positive. Julian, this was only the beginning. Real reforms take years to be fully implemented. But the foundation is set. It is, and that's what matters most. Julian grew thoughtful. Eleanor, can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Of course. When my father was dying, he called me and said he had made serious mistakes in running the hospital. He said he hoped I would be better than him. And what did you say? That he had built an empire and that I would maintain it. I never asked what mistakes he was talking about. And now you know. Now I do. And I understand why he was so tormented in the last months of his life. Julian, your father tried to reach out to me several times before he passed. He always said he wanted to make peace with me. Why did you never respond? Because I thought it was too late, that the damage was already done and couldn't be repaired. And what changed your mind? Realizing that as long as I stayed focused on the past, more people would keep getting hurt in the present. So you came back for the future, not the past. Exactly. Julian reflected on that. Eleanor, can you teach me to think that way? To focus on the future, instead of being stuck in the past? I can. In fact, it's an essential part of ethical administration. You learn from past mistakes, but you don't let them paralyze you. How does it work in practice? Every time you have to make a difficult decision, you ask, what kind of future is this decision creating? And if the answer is negative, then you change the decision, even if it costs more, especially if it costs more, because ethical decisions almost always cost more in the short term, but they generate greater benefits in the long term. 2 weeks after the audit, the results of the reforms began to show in concrete ways. The hospital was receiving public praise, new patients were choosing the hospital for its ethical reputation, and employees were more motivated. "Eleanor," Margaret reported, "we've received 15 unsolicited applications from doctors who want to work here because of the ethical reforms. Qualified doctors, very qualified. Some left more traditional hospitals to work in an environment that values ethics over profit." Julian was excited. "Does this mean our reputation has really improved?" "It means you're on the right track," Eleanor replied. "But you can't get complacent. Ethics is a daily construction, not a one-time achievement." "What do you mean?" "You're going to face constant temptations to go back to old practices, especially when there's financial pressure. And how do we resist those temptations?" "By always remembering the families we visited, remembering the faces of Mrs. Lucille, Mr. John, Mrs. Antonia." "And you? Will you be here to remind us?" "I'll be here for the next 2 years. After that, you'll have to uphold the ethical standards on your own." "And if we can't?" "Then I'll come back," Eleanor smiled. "And this time, I won't be as gentle as I was this time." A month after the reforms, something unexpected happened. A family that wasn't on Eleanor's list reached out to the hospital. "Dr. Julian," the receptionist called him, "there's a lady here who wants to talk about treatment she received in the 90s. "What lady?" "Mrs. Gloria Bennett. She says she heard about the reforms through the newspaper and wants to tell her story." Julian immediately looked for Eleanor. "Eleanor, a family showed up that wasn't on your list." "What do you mean?" "A lady who received treatment here in the 90s and apparently was also harmed." "That's possible. My investigation may not have been completely comprehensive." "What do we do?" "We talk to her. If she was truly harmed, we include her in the compensation program." They received Mrs. Bennett in Julian's office. The woman was clearly nervous but determined. "Doctors, I read in the newspaper about the changes you're making, and I thought I should tell my story." "Please, Mrs. Bennett," Eleanor said gently. "Tell us." "In 1997, I brought my 4-year-old daughter here with a simple ear infection. The doctor prescribed an antibiotic that should have cleared it up in a week. And it didn't work. Not only did it not work, it made everything worse. My daughter developed hearing problems that the doctors said were a rare complication of her condition." Julian and Eleanor exchanged glances, recognizing the pattern. "Mrs. Bennett, does your daughter still have hearing problems?" "She does. She's 28 now and has worn a hearing aid since she was a child." "And has it affected her life?" "Very much. She had difficulties in school, problems finding a job, low self-esteem. She only managed to graduate from college because I paid for private tutoring to make up for her hearing difficulties." Eleanor picked up her notebook. "Mrs. Bennett, did you keep any documents from that time?" "I kept everything. I always thought I'd need them one day." "May we see them?" Mrs. Bennett opened her bag and took out a folder with documents from that time. "Here's the original prescription, my daughter's hearing tests, and all the medical reports from the following years." Eleanor examined the documents quickly. "Mrs. Bennett, these documents clearly show that your daughter developed hearing problems right after the treatment, and the antibiotic prescribed here is exactly the kind we know was being used even though it was expired." "So you believe my story?" "We do," Julian said. "And we'll include your family in the compensation program." "But doctor, I didn't come here for money." "You didn't. I came because I want to make sure other children don't go through what my daughter went through." "And what can we do to ensure that?" "You can treat every child who comes here as if they were your own." The simplicity of the request deeply moved Julian. "Mrs. Bennett, I promise we will." "And I'll hold you to that promise, doctor. My daughter wants to meet you." "Your daughter wants to meet me?" "She works as a social worker now, specializing in children with hearing impairments. When she heard about the reforms, She was interested in seeing if she could help in some way. Eleanor was intrigued. What kind of help could she offer? She developed protocols for early identification of hearing problems in children. Would that be useful to you? It would be very useful, Julian replied. Could we schedule a meeting with her? Of course. She'd be very happy to help. After Mrs. Bennet left, Eleanor was thoughtful. Julian, this shows something important. What? That our original investigation may have missed other cases. We need to do a broader survey. How? A public announcement inviting anyone who suspects they were harmed here in the 90s to come forward. Won't that open a Pandora's box? It might, but it's the right thing to do. What if hundreds of cases come up? Then we deal with hundreds of cases. Julian, ethics isn't just about correcting the mistakes we already know about. It's about actively looking for mistakes we don't know about yet. Julian nodded, accepting the logic. All right, let's make the announcement. And we'll be prepared for whatever we find. The public announcement was published in local newspapers and on the hospital's social media. The response was bigger than anyone expected. Eleanor, Margaret reported 3 days later, we've already received 62 calls from people who want to tell their stories. 62. And the phones won't stop ringing. Julian was nervous. Eleanor, how are we going to handle so many cases? The same way we handle the others, one at a time with care and full attention. But this is going to take months. It will take as long as it needs to. And the costs? Julian, are you still thinking about costs when we're talking about fixing mistakes that hurt people? That's not it. It's just that I need to be realistic about the hospital's financial capacity. Then be realistic. How many trips to Paris did you take last year? 3. Total cost. Approximately $200,000. There you go. That's your budget to compensate 20 families. Do you want to keep counting frivolous personal expenses? Julian got the message. No need. I understand now that I can cut personal spending to increase the compensation budget. I don't want you to cut your quality of life, Julian. I want you to understand priorities. I do, and my priorities have changed. 2 months after the start of the reforms, something happened that changed everything once again. Dr. Sterling sought out Julian and Eleanor with an expression they had never seen before. Folks, I need to tell you something very important. What happened? Eleanor asked. I received a call from Washington, D.C. from the Department of Health. Julian tensed up. Do they know about our past problems? They do. But that's not what matters. Then what is it? They want our reforms to become a national model for hospital ethics. Eleanor was in shock. What do you mean, a national model? The secretary saw the reports from our audit. He was impressed by the transparency and effectiveness of the changes we implemented. And what exactly do they want? They want us to develop a pilot program that can be implemented in public and private hospitals across the country. Julian could hardly believe it. Dr. Sterling, does that mean... It means you've created something much bigger than you imagined. Eleanor was emotional, but also concerned. Dr. Sterling, are we sure our model is ready to be replicated? Eleanor, you completely transformed this hospital in 2 months. If that isn't proof that the model works, I don't know what would be. But replicating it on a national scale would be a challenge, but you've already proven you can face challenges. Julian was thinking about the implications. Eleanor, would you be willing to lead a national project? I would, but only if you come with me as co-leader. Me? But you have so much more experience. Julian, you have something I don't. Credibility as a successful hospital administrator. I have credibility as an ethics supervisor. Together, we can be more convincing to other hospitals. Dr. Sterling approved. The two of you would make a perfect team for this kind of project. And what about St. Jude's Medical Center? Julian asked. Who would take care of things here? Margaret can take over administrative leadership temporarily. She knows all the reforms you implemented. Would Margaret agree? I already spoke with her. She was excited about the possibility. Eleanor was reflecting on the implications. Folks, this is an incredible opportunity. But it's also an enormous responsibility. What do you mean? If our model fails in other hospitals, it could hurt the entire ethical reform movement in the country. And if it works? If it works, we can fundamentally transform healthcare in this country. Julian was excited about the possibility. Eleanor, do you think we're ready for this? I think we'll be ready in 6 months, once we're sure our reforms here are completely stable. And the affected families? What happens to them? They remain our priority, but now we also have the chance to prevent thousands of other families from going through the same thing. Dr. Sterling had more details. The department wants to start with a pilot project in 5 hospitals, 1 in each region of the country. And we would be responsible for overseeing the implementation in all of them. Initially, yes. Then you would train local supervisors based on the model you developed here. Eleanor was excited but cautious. Doctor. Arthur, before I accept, I'd like to completely finish the work here. What's still left to do? Visit the 48 families we haven't visited yet. Implement the second phase of the structural reforms, and train a local team that can maintain ethical standards without our constant supervision. How long would that take? 4 months of intensive work. And then you'd be available for the national project? We would. Julian was enthusiastic. Eleanor, do you realize what this means? We could impact millions of people. I do. And that's exactly why we need to make sure we're ready. We are ready. Look at everything we've accomplished in 2 months. Julian, remember what Mrs. Lucille said about words being wind? I remember. She was right. We need to prove through sustained action that our model truly works. And you think 4 months are enough to prove that? I think 4 months of consistent excellence are enough to demonstrate that the changes are permanent. In the following months, Julian and Eleanor worked tirelessly to complete all the planned reforms. Each visit to an affected family brought new lessons and further strengthened their commitment to medical ethics. At Mrs. Francis's home, a 71-year-old woman who had lost her mobility due to inadequate treatment, they had one of their most touching conversations. "Dr. Julian," she said, "do you know I was a teacher before I got sick?" "I didn't know that, Mrs. Francis." "I was. I taught hundreds of children for 40 years. My dream was to keep teaching until I was 75. And you couldn't because of the complications?" "I couldn't. I had to retire at 58 because I could no longer stand for long periods of time." Julian felt devastated. "Mrs. Francis, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Doctor, do you know what my greatest sorrow is?" "What?" "It's not being unable to teach anymore. It's knowing that other teachers might go through the same thing if they don't get proper medical care." "What do you mean?" "Teaching is a profession that takes a heavy toll on the body. We need competent medical care to keep working. If hospitals like yours don't treat us well, we end up losing experienced teachers too soon." Mrs. Francis's perspective opened a new dimension of understanding for Julian. "Are you saying medical ethics affects not just individual patients, but entire professions?" "Exactly. And not just teachers. Any professional who depends on their health to work." "I'd never thought about that." "Well, you should. Because when you treat a teacher poorly, you're hurting all the children they could have taught." Eleanor was impressed by Mrs. Francis's wisdom. "Mrs. Francis, would you like to help us develop specific protocols for education professionals?" "What do you mean?" "Creating special guidelines for treating teachers, taking into account the specific needs of the profession. I would love to help. I always dreamed of doing something that could benefit my fellow teachers." "Then you're hired as a specialized consultant." "Would you really do that?" "We would. Your knowledge would be very valuable to us." Mrs. Francis began to cry with emotion. After all these years of feeling useless, to be able to contribute to something important again. "You were never useless," Julian said, "and your knowledge can help thousands of teachers in the future." "Then I accept, with great pride." The collaboration with Mrs. Francis brought a new perspective to the reforms. They began developing specific protocols for different professions, recognizing that each work area had particular health needs. "Eleanor," Julian remarked, "Mrs. Francis gave us a brilliant idea." "The idea of profession-specific protocols?" "Exactly. That could revolutionize how hospitals serve different groups of people." And it could be part of the national model we're going to develop. Do you think the Department of Health would be interested? I think they'd be very interested. It's the kind of innovation that shows forward thinking about public health. 3.5 months after the reforms began, they received an unexpected visit. Deborah, Mrs. Rose's granddaughter, who had graduated from medical school, arrived for her first day as a resident. "Eleanor," she said upon recognizing her, "you're the family friend my grandma talked about." "That's me, Deborah. So good to see you." "I can't believe you work here. My grandma is going to be so happy." Julian observed the interaction, knowing the story behind it but unable to comment until Eleanor decided to tell the truth. "Deborah," Eleanor said, "I want to introduce you to Dr. Julian Harrison, our medical director." "Doctor, it's a pleasure. I'm so excited to start working here." "We're excited to have you with us too, Dr. Deborah. I heard you implemented some important reforms recently." "We did," Julian confirmed. "Eleanor led a complete transformation of our ethical protocols." "What kind of transformation?" Eleanor decided it was time to tell part of the truth. "Deborah, we discovered that the hospital had inappropriate practices in the past that harmed many families. We're correcting those mistakes." "What kind of practices?" "Mostly related to the quality of medications and equipment for underprivileged patients." "And it affected a lot of people?" "More than 100 families over the years." Deborah grew thoughtful. "Eleanor, was my family affected?" "Why do you ask?" "Because I've always wondered about my neurological problems. The doctors were never able to adequately explain how they came about." Eleanor looked at Julian, who nodded, indicating she should tell the truth. "Deborah, your family was one of those affected. In 1999, when you were 3 years old." "What do you mean?" "You received expired medication here that caused your neurological problems." Deborah was silent for a long moment, processing the information. "So my learning disabilities, my struggles in school, all of that was caused by medical error?" "It was, and we're truly sorry for that." "And you knew about this when you hired me?" "We knew," Julian admitted. "But we wanted you to come work here because we believe you can help ensure other children don't go through the same thing." "How?" "Your experience as a patient who overcame difficulties caused by medical error gives you a unique perspective on how to improve patient care." Deborah reflected on that. "You're offering me the chance to turn my suffering into something positive for others." "We are," Eleanor confirmed, "if you want it." "I do, more than anything." "Then welcome to the team, Dr. Deborah. Eleanor, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Were you the nurse who took care of me when I was little?" "I was. And ever since then, I've never stopped worrying about you." "Is that why you anonymously helped me with my studies all those years?" Eleanor was surprised. "How did you know it was me?" "My grandma told me recently. She always suspected you were the guardian angel who paid for my tutoring." "And you're not upset that I didn't tell you the truth before?" "I would be if you weren't doing something to correct the mistakes. But now I understand that you were always fighting to do the right thing." Julian was moved watching the conversation. "Doctor." "Deborah, can you forgive us for the mistakes of the past?" "Dr. Julian, I forgive you. But I want to work with you to make sure no other child goes through what I went through. Then let's work together." Deborah's arrival on the team brought new energy to the reforms. Her perspective as a patient who had been harmed, but who became a doctor despite the difficulties, was invaluable. "Eleanor," she said a week later, "can I suggest an additional reform?" "Of course. What is it?" "A long-term follow-up program for children who undergo complex treatments here." "How would it work?" "Regular follow-up appointments until adulthood to ensure there are no undetected late complications." Dr. Julian approved immediately. "Excellent idea. That would prevent cases like yours from going unnoticed." "Exactly, and it would give families confidence that we truly are taking good care of the children." "Deborah," Eleanor said, "do you want to lead this program?" "I would love to. It's the kind of work I've always dreamed of doing." "Then the program is yours, with a full budget and dedicated team." 4 months after the start of the reforms, the time came to assess the overall results. Dr. Arthur organized a general meeting with the entire hospital staff. "Everyone," he began, "I want to share the numbers from the reforms we implemented. What numbers? Margaret asked. First, compensation for affected families, 127 families from Eleanor's original list, plus 84 families that came forward after the public announcement. 211 families in total. Correct, total compensation, $8.5 million. Dr. Julian did the math. Dr. Arthur, that's more than the budget we had approved. It is, but the board approved additional funds because the results exceeded all expectations. What results? A 40% increase in demand for private consultations, a 70% reduction in patient complaints, complete elimination of malpractice lawsuits. Eleanor was pleased. And the staff? How are they reacting to the changes? The internal satisfaction survey showed 95% approval of the reforms, a 60% reduction in staff turnover, a significant increase in applications to work here. And financially, the hospital is more profitable now than it was before the reforms. The ethical reputation attracted patients who value quality of care. Dr. Julian was impressed. Dr. Arthur, how is that possible? We spent millions on reforms and compensation. Because medical ethics is good business, Julian. Ethical hospitals attract better professionals, have fewer legal problems, and build long-term patient loyalty. Eleanor, did you know it would be like this? I expected it. I studied other cases of ethical reforms, and the results are usually positive when the changes are genuine. And are we ready for the national project? We are. In fact, we've already started receiving visits from other hospitals interested in learning our methods. How many hospitals? 12 so far, from New York, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and other major cities. Dr. Arthur had one last surprise. Everyone, there's something else I need to tell you. What? The Pan American Health Organization learned about our project. They want to study our model for possible implementation in other Latin American countries. Other countries? Eleanor was shocked. Yes, Argentina, Colombia, and Peru have already expressed interest. Dr. Arthur, this is far beyond what I dreamed of when I came back here. Eleanor, didn't you dream of transforming the health of an entire region? I dreamed of getting justice for 127 families. I never imagined it would grow this much. Dr. Julian was reflecting on the journey. Eleanor, do you remember when you first opened that old bag? I remember. Did you imagine we would get this far? Honestly, no. I had hoped to secure compensation for the families and maybe implement some basic reforms here. And what made the difference? Your genuine willingness to change and the support of the entire staff who truly care about the patients. And your meticulous 28 years of planning. That too, she smiled. 5 months after the start of the reforms, on the eve of launching the national project, Eleanor and Julian visited the last family on the original list. Eleanor, Julian said in the car, how do you feel knowing we've visited all 127 families? I feel like I kept the promise I made to myself 28 years ago. What promise? That one day I would bring justice to all of them. And you did. We did. You were essential to this process, Julian. I almost ruined everything on the first day, but you didn't, and that's what matters. They stopped in front of a modest house in the Garden District where the last family lived, Mrs. Mercy and her son Anthony, who had developed respiratory problems due to improper medication in 1998. Dr. Julian, Mrs. Mercy said when they explained the situation, do you know that my son was never able to play sports again because of his respiratory problems? I didn't know that, Mrs. Mercy. He was the goalkeeper for his school team. He dreamed of becoming a professional player. And he couldn't because of the complications? He couldn't. At 15, he had to give up soccer because he couldn't run anymore without running out of breath. Julian looked at Anthony, now a 27-year-old man. Anthony, how do you feel about all this? Doctor, I've made peace with that story, but I'm happy knowing other children won't go through the same thing. You don't feel anger? I did for years, but anger doesn't change anything. Now I prefer to focus on solutions. What kind of solutions? I work with children and teenagers who have respiratory problems. I teach them to deal with their limitations and find other ways to fulfill themselves. Eleanor was moved. Anthony, You turned your suffering into a mission to help others. I actually learned that from you. From me? My mother told me how a mysterious nurse showed up here a few years ago to help our family. I always knew it was you. How did you know? Because you were the only person who truly cared about me when I was a kid in the hospital. Julian was watching the interaction, realizing how Eleanor's impact went far beyond what she herself imagined. Anthony, Julian said, would you like to work with us on the national project? What do you mean? We need people who understand the real impact of medical errors to help implement reforms in other hospitals. Would you really do that? We would. Your experience would be very valuable. And could I continue my work with children? You could. In fact, you could expand your work to a national scale. Anthony looked at his mother, who was crying with emotion. Mom, what do you think? I think this is your chance to turn your story into something that can help thousands of children. Then I accept. After visiting all the families, Eleanor and Julian returned to the hospital for a final conversation before starting the national project. Julian, Eleanor said, I want to ask you something important. What is it? Do you feel prepared to lead ethical reforms on a national scale? I do. Especially because I know you'll be with me. And if I weren't, if you had to do this alone, then I would do it. Because now I understand that medical ethics isn't optional. It's fundamental. And what if you face pressure to go back to old practices? Then I remember the faces of all the families we visited. I remember Mrs. Lucille, Mr. John, Mrs. Antonia, Mrs. Francis, all of them. Julian, you've truly changed. I changed because you showed me how, and because I understood that being a good medical administrator means being, first and foremost, a good human being. And how do you define a good human being? Someone who uses their power to help, not to harm. Someone who cares more about others' well-being than their own comfort. Eleanor smiled, pleased with the answer. Julian, there's one last thing in my bag that I've never shown you. What is it? Something I wrote the night before coming back here. She took a folded piece of paper out of her bag. It's a letter to myself. A kind of commitment to what I wanted to achieve. Can you read it? Eleanor, tomorrow you go back to the place where your life changed forever. You will face the people who hurt you, but you will also offer them the chance to become better. Remember, you are not fighting against them. You are fighting for all the families that can still be saved. Don't let the past dominate the future. Use the past to build a better future. Julian was moved. Eleanor, you achieved so much more than you promised yourself in this letter. We achieved so much more because you decided to be better than I expected. And now we take this experience to other hospitals, and we multiply the impact. Eleanor, can I keep a copy of this letter? Why? To remind me that it's always possible to use the past to build a better future. You can keep the original. I don't need it anymore. Why not? Because now the future it imagined has become the present, and I can write a new letter with even bigger dreams. 6 months later, the national project was being implemented in 15 hospitals across the country. Julian and Eleanor traveled across the country, teaching other administrators about practical medical ethics. Eleanor, Julian said during a flight to Portland, are you happy with the results? I am, but mostly I'm at peace. What do you mean at peace? For 28 years I carried the weight of knowing about injustices and not being able to correct them. Now I know we're making a real difference. And what about your personal life? Do you still miss having a family of your own? Julian, do you know those 201 families we helped? I do. They became my family. Every grandmother who regained her dignity, every child who is receiving proper treatment, every mother who no longer has to worry about medical discrimination. And is that enough for you? It's more than enough. It's fulfillment. Eleanor, can I tell you something I learned from you? Of course. I learned that true fulfillment doesn't come from accumulating things for yourself. It comes from using your talents to improve other people's lives. And do you feel fulfilled now? I do. For the first time in my life, I feel truly useful. Julian, You have an 8-year-old daughter. I do. What do you want her to think about the work you do? I want her to be proud. I want her to know that her father devotes his life to caring for people. And do you think she would be proud? I think so. Just yesterday she asked me why I'm always talking about helping families. I explained to her that it's my job to make sure all children receive good medical treatment, not just the ones who have money. And what did she say? That she wants to be a doctor like me when she grows up, but the kind who helps everyone. Eleanor laughed. She's going to be an excellent doctor. She will, and she'll grow up in a world where medical ethics is the norm, not the exception. A year after the reforms began, Eleanor was in her office organizing reports for the national project when she received an unexpected visit. Eleanor, Margaret knocked on the door. There's someone here to see you. Who is it? Mrs. Gladys. Eleanor was confused. Margaret, Mrs. Gladys passed away 2 years ago. Not that Gladys. It's her daughter who has the same name. Eleanor went downstairs to find a woman in her 50s waiting in the lobby. Are you Eleanor Miller? I am, and you are... Gladys O'Connor Jr., daughter of the Gladys who worked here for years. Ah, yes. I'm so sorry for the loss of your mother. Thank you. I came here because I found some things among her belongings. What kind of things? Letters. Many letters addressed to you. Eleanor was surprised. Your mother wrote letters to me. She did, for years, always hoping to find you so she could deliver them in person. And you brought them? I did. I thought you'd like to read them. Gladys O'Connor Jr. handed her a small box full of yellowed envelopes. Can I open it now? Of course. Eleanor opened the first letter, dated 2010. Dear Nurse Eleanor, I don't know if you'll ever read this letter, but I need to write it. I want you to know that I never forgot your kindness. You were the only person in this hospital who treated me like a human being. I hope you're well and happy wherever you are. Eleanor had tears in her eyes. She wrote this in 2010? She did. And she kept writing one letter a year until she passed away. Eleanor opened a few more letters, each one more touching than the last. Gladys O'Connor Jr., your mother never knew that I came back here. She didn't. She passed away 3 months before you came back. And she never knew about the reforms? No. But she always said she was sure that one day you'd do something important to help people like her. How did she know? She said you had eyes of someone who never gives up, that sooner or later you'd find a way to do the right thing. Julian, who had come downstairs to find Eleanor, overheard the conversation. Gladys O'Connor Jr., he said, your mother was a very wise woman. Did you know her? I did. She took care of my family for years. She was like a second mother to me. And did you know about the problems she faced here? Julian took a deep breath. I didn't know at the time, but I know now. And I'm very sorry for that. Did you do anything to make it right? Eleanor taught me to see the real impact of administrative decisions on people's lives. Then my mother would be proud. Why? Because she always said you were a good person at heart, that you just needed someone to show you the right path. And Eleanor was that person. She was, and now you can help many other families. Gladys O'Connor Jr. got ready to leave. Eleanor, can I ask you a favor? Of course. My mother always dreamed that one day this hospital would become a place where all people were treated with dignity. Can you promise me that this will never change? I promise. And Julian promises too. I promise, Julian confirmed. Your mother deserves for us to keep this hospital as she dreamed it would be. Thank you. Now I can rest knowing her dream came true. After Gladys O'Connor Jr. left, Eleanor and Julian were silent for a while. Eleanor, Julian said finally, do you realize the legacy we've built? We built it? Yes, we did, together. You brought the vision and determination. I brought the administrative authority. And together, we created something greater than either of us could have created alone. Julian, can I tell you a secret? Of course. When I first came here, I thought you were just like your father. Arrogant, insensitive, interested only in money. And now? Now I know you're better than your father, because when you saw the truth, you had the courage to change it. And you, Eleanor, has anything changed in how you see me? It has. I learned that it's possible to teach ethics to anyone, as long as they're genuinely willing to learn. And do you think I've learned? I think you've become one of the most ethical hospital administrators I know. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. And it means even more because it's true. 2 years after the reforms began, the moment Eleanor had promised from the very beginning arrived. Her official supervision over Julian would come to an end, and he would take on full administrative autonomy. "Julian," she said on the last day of official supervision, "do you feel ready to lead on your own?" "I do, but I'd like you to stay here as a partner, not as a supervisor." "What do you mean?" "As co-director, you handling the ethical and quality aspects, me handling operations and finances." "Julian, is this an official offer?" "It is, approved by the board, with a salary equal to mine." "And why are you proposing this?" "Because I've learned that effective administration needs multiple perspectives. On my own, I might fall back into the same mistakes." "And with permanent supervision?" "With a permanent partnership, we can keep innovating and improving." Eleanor reflected on the proposal. "Julian, what does your daughter think about you working with me?" "She really likes you. She always asks about Aunt Eleanor, who helps families." "Aunt Eleanor? That's what she nicknamed you. I hope you don't mind." "I don't mind. Actually, it moves me." "So, do you accept the proposal?" "I do, but with one condition." "What is it?" "That we create a development program for young hospital administrators to teach medical ethics from the very start of their careers." "Excellent idea. How would it work?" "Mandatory internships that include shadowing visits to families affected by medical errors, so they understand early on the human impact of administrative decisions. That would prevent future administrators from making the same mistakes I made." "Exactly." "Eleanor, will you agree to lead this program as well?" "I will. It will be part of my responsibilities as co-director." 5 years after the day Eleanor opened her old bag in the hospital hallway, she was in her office organizing reports for an international conference on medical ethics. "Eleanor," Julian entered, "I just got a call from the Department of Health." "Good or bad?" "Good. They want our model to be officially implemented in all public hospitals across the country." "All of them?" "All of them. That would be more than 5,000 hospitals." Eleanor was silent for a moment, processing the magnitude of the proposal. "Julian, do you realize what this means?" "It means we can impact millions of people. It means that old bag I carried for 28 years can change the healthcare of an entire country. And are you ready for that challenge?" "I am. But only if you're with me." "I'll always be with you, Eleanor. We're partners now." "Forever?" "Forever." That afternoon they visited the cemetery where Dr. Charles Harrison was buried. Julian had asked for them to go together. "Dad," Julian said in front of the grave, "I came here with Eleanor to tell you we managed to fix the mistakes." Eleanor placed a bouquet of flowers on the grave. "Dr. Charles, I forgive you for the choices you made, and thank you for raising a son who was capable of choosing to be better." "Do you think he would approve of what we've done?" Julian asked. "I think he would be proud, especially of you." "Why?" "Because you had the courage he didn't have, the courage to admit mistakes and correct them publicly. And you, Eleanor? Are you at peace with everything that happened?" "I am. For the first time in 28 years, I am completely at peace." On the way back to the hospital, they stopped at a simple diner where Eleanor used to eat during her difficult years. "Julian, do you want to see the place where I planned my return to the hospital?" "I do. It was here, at this corner table. I came here every week for years, organizing documents, planning strategies, dreaming of the day I could see justice done. And now? Now I can eat here knowing the dream came true." "Eleanor, do you have new dreams?" "I do. I dream of a country where medical ethics is the standard in every hospital, where no family has to go through what those 211 families went through. Is that dream achievable? With the national program, yes. In 10 years, we can completely transform Brazilian medical culture. And after those 10 years, we can teach other countries to do the same. Julian smiled. Eleanor, you never stop dreaming big. Julian, when you dedicate your life to a purpose greater than yourself, dreams naturally grow big. And you taught me that. You already had that inside you. I just helped awaken it. 10 years after the opening of the bag, Eleanor was giving a lecture at the World Health Organization in Geneva about the Brazilian model of hospital ethics that she and Julian had developed. Ladies and gentlemen, she said to an audience of representatives from 40 countries, today I want to tell the story of how an old bag changed the lives of millions of people. In the audience, Julian was present as a co-speaker, proud of the partner who had become one of the world's leading experts in medical ethics. It all began when I decided I could no longer live knowing that injustices were being committed and do nothing about them. After the lecture, a representative from the World Health Organization approached. Ms. Miller, we would like to propose that you lead a global project to implement medical ethics. Global? Yes, starting with Latin American countries, then expanding to Africa and Asia. Eleanor looked at Julian. What do you think? I think it's the natural continuation of our work. Even if it means traveling constantly, working in different cultures, facing greater resistance. Especially because of that, because it means we can help even more people. Julian, are you sure? Your daughter is 18 now. Maybe you'd want to spend more time with her. Eleanor, my daughter is studying medicine in college. Do you know what her dream is? What? To work with us when she graduates, to continue the work we started. She said that. She did. And she said she wants to be like you when she grows up. Like me. A person who uses their entire life to make a real difference in the world. Eleanor was moved. Julian, accepting this global project means we might never be able to stop working. And you see that as a problem? No. I see it as a privilege. So you accept? I do. But only if you accept too. I accept. We're partners, remember? Forever. Forever. 15 years after the opening of the bag, Eleanor was at St. Jude's Medical Center preparing a special ceremony. The hospital was receiving the International Award for Excellence in Medical Ethics. Eleanor, Julian said, do you realize this award is a direct result of that day when you opened your bag? I do. And I realize that all the suffering, all the difficulties, all the sleepless nights were worth it. And now? Do you still carry a bag with secrets? Now I carry a bag full of fulfilled dreams. What kind of dreams? The dream of seeing hospitals in 47 countries implementing ethical protocols based on our model. The dream of seeing millions of families receiving dignified treatment. The dream of seeing a new generation of doctors growing up with ethics as a priority. And future dreams. I dream of the day when medical ethics is so natural that it no longer needs special oversight. When every doctor, every nurse, every administrator naturally does the right thing. Will that day come? It will. Maybe not in our generation, but it will come. And how can we speed that up? By continuing to do what we do. Teaching, supervising, supporting, and above all, leading by example. During the awards ceremony, representatives from hospitals around the world were present. Julian was called to speak about the administrative transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, 15 years ago, I was an arrogant and insensitive hospital administrator. I harmed hundreds of families with discriminatory policies and decisions based solely on profit. And what changed? Asked a representative from Canada. A courageous woman carrying an old bag showed me the human face of my decisions, and she gave me the chance to become a better person. How did she do that? First, by showing me irrefutable evidence of the harm I was causing. Second, by introducing me personally to the families I had hurt. Third, by offering me solutions instead of just criticism. And what was the result? The result was the complete transformation of my perspective on hospital administration. I learned that ethics isn't an added cost, it's a fundamental investment. Dr. Julian, another representative, asked, "What advice would you give to administrators who resist ethical reforms?" That they meet personally the people affected by their decisions. It's impossible to maintain harmful policies when you see the human face of the consequences. And what if they say they don't have time for that? Then tell them to make time, because if they don't have time to learn about the impact of their decisions, they shouldn't be making those decisions. When it was Eleanor's turn to speak, she approached the podium carrying her old bag. "This bag," she said, "represented 28 years of my life. During all that time, it held evidence of injustices and dreams of change." "And now?" asked the moderator. "Now it holds reports of successes, stories of families who were compensated, ethical protocols being implemented in thousands of hospitals, and above all, proof that real change is possible." What's your main lesson from these 15 years? That one determined person with solid evidence and constructive proposals can transform entire systems. And what advice would you give to others who identify injustices in their fields? First, document everything meticulously. Second, prepare solutions, not just criticism. Third, be patient for the right moment to act. And fourth, never give up. Even if it takes decades, the truth always finds a way to prevail. Mrs. Miller, a representative from France, asked, "Do you have plans to expand the model even further?" "We do. We're developing a digital platform that will allow ethical protocols to be implemented in any hospital in the world." How would it work? Digital auditing, online training, remote supervision, and a global network of medical ethics experts. And when will it be available? In 2 years. It will be free for public hospitals and have a symbolic cost for private ones. Mrs. Miller, another representative, asked, "What is your greatest ambition for the future?" "My greatest ambition is that one day, conferences like this will no longer be necessary. That medical ethics becomes so natural, it doesn't need to be taught separately. And until then? Until then, we'll keep working, teaching, supervising, supporting. Because every family we save from going through medical injustices is worth all the effort." Dr. Julian, the moderator, addressed him, "As Mrs. Miller's partner, what is your role in this vision of the future?" "My role is to ensure hospital administrators understand that ethics and efficiency are not opposing concepts, that it's possible to be profitable and ethical at the same time." "And you proved that?" "We proved it at our hospital and at hundreds of others. Ethical hospitals attract better professionals, have fewer legal problems, and build long-term loyalty. So medical ethics is good business? It's the best business possible because it builds real sustainability, not just short-term profits." After the conference, Eleanor and Julian walked through the streets of Geneva, reflecting on the journey. "Eleanor," Julian said, "did you ever imagine we'd get this far when you first opened that bag?" "Never. My most ambitious dreams were far smaller than the reality we built." And what does that teach you? That when you do the right thing for the right reasons, the universe conspires to amplify your impact. Do you really believe that? I do, because I saw it happen. One ethical decision leads to another, which leads to another, which leads to transformations you never imagined possible. And what's the next step? The next step is to keep doing the right thing, one day at a time, one family at a time, one hospital at a time. Until when? Until it's no longer necessary. And if it never stops being necessary, then we never stop. Julian smiled. "Eleanor, there's one last question I want to ask you. What is it? Are you happy?" "Julian, I'm more than happy. I'm complete." "What do you mean complete?" "I found my purpose in life and I was able to live it fully." "How many people can say that?" "And me? Did I become the person you hoped I would be?" "Julian, you became better than I hoped. You became the kind of leader the world needs. Thank you for everything." "No, thank you for accepting to change, for choosing to be better." We make a good team. We do, and we always will. They went back to the hotel where they were staying, already planning the next phase of the global project. Eleanor picked up her old bag, which now accompanied every work trip. Julian, do you know what's in this bag now? What? Photos of every family we've helped. Thank you letters from hospitals we've renovated. And most importantly, letters from children who grew up in ethical hospitals because of our work. May I see them? Eleanor opened the bag, now full of positive memories instead of evidence of injustices. Here's a letter from a 10-year-old girl from Recife. She writes, "Thank you for making the hospital in my city treat all children equally. Now I'm not afraid of getting sick anymore." Julian was moved. Eleanor, this letter is worth more than any award we could ever receive. It is, because it represents a child who will grow up knowing she deserves dignified medical care. And are there more letters like this one? Hundreds. From children, parents, grandparents, all thanking us for changes they don't even know started with an old bag in New Orleans. Eleanor, you turned your personal suffering into joy for thousands of people. We turned it. Together. Together. 20 years after the bag was opened, Eleanor was preparing to officially retire. At 62, she had dedicated half her life to reforming Brazilian and international medical ethics. "Julian," she said on her last official day, "are you ready to continue the work on your own?" "Never on my own, but I am ready to lead the next generation." "What do you mean?" "Deborah is going to take over my position. Anthony will lead the international program, and your niece, Rachel, will coordinate the ethical protocols." "Rachel? Julian's daughter?" "Yes. She became a specialist in medical ethics and wants to dedicate her career to continuing our work. And you approve?" "I do. In fact, I'm proud that our next generation is made up of people who grew up understanding that medical ethics is fundamental." "Julian, what's your plan for the coming years?" "I want to write a book about our experience, so that others can learn from our mistakes and successes." "What title would you use?" "The Bag That Changed Everything. A story of ethics, courage, and transformation." "I like that title. And you, Eleanor, what are your plans for retirement?" "I want to go back and visit the families we've helped over the years, see how they're doing, how their lives have evolved, how they feel about the changes. A kind of farewell tour, a kind of gratitude tour. Can I join you on some of those visits?" "Of course. It would be nice to revisit our journey together." On Eleanor's last official day of work, the entire hospital gathered for a farewell ceremony. Staff from every shift, doctors, nurses, housekeeping personnel, everyone was present. "Eleanor," Margaret said, speaking on behalf of everyone, "you changed not just this hospital but our lives." "What do you mean, changed your lives?" "You taught us that every one of us can make a difference, that we don't need to be directors or supervisors to practice ethics in our day-to-day work." "And did you learn that?" "We did. Now every employee here sees themselves as a guardian of medical ethics." Mrs. Rose, now 80 years old but still working at the hospital, came closer. "Eleanor, dear, do you remember when you first arrived that first day carrying that bag?" "I remember, Mrs. Rose. I knew something important was going to happen. You had that determined look of someone who wasn't going to give up. And you were right." "I always am," Mrs. Rose laughed. 45 years working here taught me to recognize special people. Mrs. Rose, you're special too. You've always been the soul of this place. And now, who's going to be the soul when you leave? All of you, together." Dr. Arthur Sterling approached with a package. "Eleanor, the board prepared a farewell gift." "You didn't have to." "Yes, we did. Open it." Eleanor opened the package and found a new bag made of fine leather with an engraved plaque. "For Eleanor Miller, who taught us that small gestures can bring about great transformations." "It's beautiful," she said, emotional. "We want you to carry this new bag into your next adventures." "And what will I carry in it?" "Even bigger dreams," Dr. Julian Harrison replied. "Always bigger dreams," she agreed. At the final ceremony, Eleanor was invited to speak to the entire team. "Everyone," she began, "when I arrived here 20 years ago, I was carrying a bag full of pain, anger, and evidence of injustice. And now I'm leaving, carrying a bag full of gratitude, pride, and the certainty that we did the right thing. Eleanor, a young resident asked, what advice would you give to our generation? Never accept that "that's how it's always been" is a justification for bad practices. Always question, always seek better ways of doing things. And what if we face resistance? Face it with evidence, constructive proposals, and a great deal of patience. Real change takes time, but it's always possible. Eleanor, Margaret asked, are you going to miss us? I'm going to miss you all. But I'm not going to miss working, because I intend to keep working until I can't anymore. On other projects? On projects I haven't even imagined yet, because I learned that when you dedicate your life to helping others, new opportunities to help always come along. Dr. Julian Harrison took the floor. Everyone, I want you to know that working with Eleanor these past few years was the most transformative experience of my life. How so? Someone asked. She taught me that true success isn't measured by the money you accumulate, but by the lives you manage to improve. And did you apply that lesson? I did. And I discovered that helping others brings a satisfaction that no material luxury can provide. Dr. Julian Harrison, another employee asked, are you still being supervised? I am, but now by my own choice, not out of obligation. What do you mean? Because I learned that ethical supervision makes me a better administrator. It keeps me from making harmful decisions and helps me find creative solutions. And who's going to do the supervising now? Deborah will take on that role. She was personally trained by Eleanor. Deborah stood up. Everyone, I take on this responsibility with great pride, and I promise to uphold the standards Eleanor established. How are you going to do that? Margaret asked. The same way Eleanor did. Personally getting to know each family affected by our decisions, visiting the departments regularly, and never forgetting that we manage lives, not numbers. Eleanor felt proud. Deborah, you've learned the most important lesson. Which one? That medical ethics is the personal responsibility of every professional, not just institutional policy. And how do I pass that on to others? Through example. When you consistently do the right thing, others naturally follow. Eleanor, Anthony spoke up. May I ask a question? Of course, Anthony. What do you want to be remembered about our work here? I want it to be remembered that transformation is possible, that people can change, that systems can be reformed, and that small acts of courage can generate enormous change. Anything else? That medical ethics is not a political or philosophical issue. It's a basic human issue. It's about treating every person with the dignity they deserve. The ceremony ended with everyone present making a renewed pledge to uphold the established ethical standards. We promise, they said in unison, to continue the work of transformation started by Eleanor Miller and Dr. Julian Harrison. We promise to treat every patient with dignity, regardless of social class. We promise to never forget that behind every administrative decision, there are real human lives. And we promise that St. Jude's Medical Center will continue to be an example of medical ethics for the world. After the ceremony, Eleanor and Julian were alone in the office they had shared for so many years. Eleanor, Julian said, I want you to know that these have been the best years of my professional life. Why? Because they were the years when I truly made a difference. Years when I can say with pride that my work improved the lives of others. And personally, how have these years affected your personal life? They made me a better father, a better person, a better human being. My daughter grew up watching her father devote his life to helping others. That shaped her character in a fundamental way. And she really wants to continue our work? She does. In fact, she already has proposals to improve our protocols. What kind of proposals? Mainly about including people with disabilities in medical protocols. She wants to ensure that all hospitals are prepared to adequately serve people with different needs. That's an excellent area of focus. It is, and it shows that the next generation is thinking even more inclusively than we did. Julian, that gives me great hope for the future. Why? Because it means the work we did took root, that the next generation grew up with fundamental ethical values. And does that guarantee continuity? It guarantees more than continuity. It guarantees evolution. Each generation can improve upon the work of the previous one. Eleanor picked up her old bag for the last time at the hospital. Julian, I want to give you something. What is it? This. She handed the old bag to him. Eleanor, I can't accept this. This bag is part of your story, and now it needs to be part of your story. So you never forget where we came from and where we're going. What do I do with it? Keep it in your office, and whenever you have to make a difficult decision, remember what this bag represented. And what did it represent? Courage to face injustices, determination to seek change, and above all, faith that it's possible to build a better world. Julian accepted the bag with reverence. Eleanor, I promise I will honor what it represents. I know you will. And I promise that when my daughter takes over my position, I will pass this bag on to her. With the complete story. So she understands the responsibility she's taking on. Julian, that leaves me at complete peace. Why? Because I know our story doesn't end with us, that it will continue through the next generations. Forever? Forever. The end of the story. Now tell me what you thought of this story of transformation and overcoming. If you were moved by Eleanor and Julian's journey, leave a comment telling us which part touched you the most. Do you believe people can really change when confronted with the truth? I'd love to read your honest opinion.